Once upon a tall tale. The Old Story, Told Wrong, by Morgan Olson. Once Upon a Tall Tale, Season 0, Episode 1. Someone always tells the old story wrong. They say it was Armenian, or Georgian, or just old enough that no one feels responsible for it anymore. A boy goes to a city with a name that keeps changing. He spends his family's money on women who are beautiful in a way that costs him every time he looks. When the money runs out, the city keeps him anyway. That's usually where the teller laughs and says something about learning a lesson. No one ever agrees on what the lesson was. The version that gets told now skips the moral. The city isn't a place, it's a site. The women are illusionists. The boy isn't a fool so much as impatient. Someone always adds that the curse is the part that makes you stay. Someone else says that's bullshit, that people just don't know when to quit once they've figured out how to make rent without a boss. That's the version people like. It sounds modern. It sounds earned. What never makes it into the telling is the part where the boy chose. Tellers skip it because it complicates the lesson. Listeners skip it because they prefer their lessons clean. But every version of the story has a quiet second half nobody talks about. The first half is what the city did to the boy. The second half is what the boy did about it. 2. The Hedge House. Devin Oakford didn't grow up around spells the way rich kids did, the ones who talked about foundation forms and wore their wards like jewelry. He grew up around work, around things that were supposed to function. His father, Cantor Oakford, always had his hands stained with something. Ink from old seals, soot from burned paper, resin from cracked charms older than they had a right to be. The house smelled like boiled herbs and warm metal and whatever cheap solvent it took to make an ancient blessing stick one more season. They didn't make talismans in that house. They kept them from dying. People brought them in wrapped in towels like injured birds. A garden ward with a hairline fracture. A door charm that had started letting in drafts and arguments. A goblin repellent plate, half joke, half prayer, that someone swore used to work before the raccoons got bold. Cantor would set each thing on the table, squint at it like it was misbehaving, and charge the client what they could pay without breaking them. High magic is for people who can afford to be wrong, Cantor said once, not bitter, just matter of fact. We don't get that luxury. Devin learned fast, not the big gestures. There weren't any. He learned how to listen to an object the way you listen to a machine that's about to fail. He learned which cracks were cosmetic and which ones meant the whole thing would blow its seal and sour the room. Mostly, he learned patience, because patience was what hedge magic ran on when it ran out of power. Then, one afternoon, he picked up a charm Cantor had been sweating over. A warm stone talisman for an old woman's knees, nothing impressive. And the thing filled the way a kettle fills when you forget to watch it. Not with Devin's energy. He didn't feel anything leave him. He just felt the air change, a slight pressure shift, like a window had opened somewhere in the house. Cantor looked up too quickly. "Put it down," he said. Devin did, confused. The charm kept humming for a moment after, like it hadn't gotten the memo. Cantor stared at him longer than was comfortable, then looked away like staring might make it worse. "Don't do that for people," he said. "Not yet." Why? Cantor wiped his hands on a rag that would never be clean again. Because the minute the world sees you can do something for free, it starts charging you for it. 3. The letter. The letter arrived folded too neatly, like it had practiced. Heavy paper, careful seal, no return address anyone would recognize unless they already knew what it meant. Cantor didn't touch it. Devin opened it himself at the kitchen table, between a cooling mug of tea and a charm that refused to hold its edge. The language was kind. That was the first problem. It thanked Devin Oakford for his submission. It noted his scores, his aptitude assessments, the unusual consistency in his work. It said promising twice. once in the opening paragraph and once near the end, as if the word might mean something different the second time through. Then it did the thing all such letters do and moved the ground without announcing it. At this time, we are unable to offer you a place. We encourage you to continue your studies independently. Independently meant without access. Without materials he couldn't buy. Without teachers who didn't have to watch the clock. It meant the door had been acknowledged and closed in the same motion. Cantor read it after, standing, eyes flicking over the page like he already knew where it would land. He nodded once, the way a man confirms a weather report. They don't take hedge kids unless someone vouches, he said. And no one vouches unless you've already done the work somewhere they can see it. Where? Cantor hesitated, just long enough to count. Places that burn people out, places that prove things under pressure. That night, Devon searched until his eyes hurt. Buried forums, half-dead links. Names that didn't stay up for long. One name kept coming back, spelled 3 different ways, usually followed by a warning or a joke. Trifless, or something like it. Someone had written beneath it, years ago. Counts as a feeder if you survive. 4. Trifless. Trifless didn't show up all at once. It surfaced in pieces. Screenshots that went dead when you clicked them. References that assumed you already knew what they meant. Jokes that only worked if you didn't ask follow-up questions. When Devon finally reached something that stayed open, it wasn't a homepage, so much as an apology for one. The site looked handmade on purpose. Margins that weren't straight. Fonts that leaned a little too hard into looking copied by hand. A note at the top, written like the writer expected to be interrupted. We don't advertise. If you found us, you were already looking. There was no sign-up button, just a request. State what you can keep running. Devon hesitated, then typed something modest about repairs and recharging. He didn't mention the Warmstone talisman. He didn't know how to describe it yet. The reply came back faster than he expected, polite, warm, interested in the way people get when they think they've solved a small problem without making a fuss about it. You won't need to perform. We value support work. There was a mention of coin, framed like a courtesy, to keep the rooms open, to keep things fair. Devon paid without feeling like he'd crossed a line. It felt closer to tipping than buying. Inside, the place was busier than the site suggested. Illusions layered over other illusions, some careful, some loud, some already slipping at the edges. People moved through it the way co-workers on different shifts move through a break room, trading nods, half-jokes, apologies for chairs they hadn't moved. Someone laughed near him and said something about the curse, the word tossed out the way people talk about weather they don't plan to change. Once you start performing, you never really stop, a woman said, adjusting a glamour that flickered at the corner of her smile. A few people laughed. Someone else added, "That's just because it's easier than explaining gaps on a resume." Devon didn't laugh, but he didn't bristle either. The tone wasn't predatory, it was tired, practical. People here knew what they were doing, and they knew why they kept doing it, and those reasons didn't have to agree with each other to coexist. He found himself in a lower room after that, a place that felt like waiting. Regulars called the building the Tower. The lowest floor was where you went when you didn't know what you were yet. Screens paused, conversations idling, a few people checking the time the way you check a pulse. No one asked him to do anything, no one rushed him. Around him, the conversations had the cadence of things repeated. You learn to pace it, someone said, like advice they'd given before. Helps them sleep, helps them explain why they're still here. And once, gently, from a man checking a clock and standing to leave. You here to work, or you here to tell a story about yourself? No one was talking to Devon. He understood that. He also understood that the room was the kind of room that taught you things sideways. That probably should have been the warning. 5. The talisman. They handed it to him like it didn't matter. A small thing. Old, flat metal, worn smooth at the edges. stamped once with a pattern that had lost its confidence over the years. The kind of talisman hedge mages used when they didn't want to admit they were hoping for more than they were paying for. Someone nearby said it was the sort they kept around for pests, garden goblins, draft spirits, anything that liked to settle where it wasn't invited. "Careful," a man said, not looking at Devon. "Those'll bite back if you rush them." Another voice, casual. "Old mages use those when they're in trouble, when they can't afford to wait for help." Devon turned it over in his hands. It felt heavier than it should have, like it was remembering something. He waited for the part where he was supposed to focus, or brace, or feel the pull everyone talked about. None of that came. He just held it. The talisman filled. Not gradually, not in stages. It came awake all at once, the way a room light snaps on where no one had noticed the switch. Lines appeared that hadn't been there a second before. Fine, deliberate etchings threading themselves into place. A low hum settled into the air, steady enough to feel rather than hear. The temperature shifted, just enough that a few people rubbed their arms without realizing why. Someone laughed, then stopped. Devon waited for the drain, the recoil, the sharp edge everyone warned about. It never arrived. He felt exactly the same as he had a moment before, except that the talisman in his hands was very clearly done. More than done. It was running things he didn't recognize, functions the talisman hadn't reached in years. "That's enough," someone said, quickly this time. The talisman kept humming after Devon set it down, like it hadn't agreed to stop just because it was told to. An older mage took a step back, hand pressed to his chest, eyes wide in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with surprise. Devon looked around, suddenly aware that the room had gone very still. A presence he hadn't noticed before reached in and picked the talisman up carefully, like it might be offended by rough handling. The person didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked at the object once, then at Devon, and made a decision without announcing it. "Come with me." 6. No curse. The room they took him to didn't look important. That was the first thing Devon noticed. No banners, no sigils that announced themselves, just clean surfaces and objects placed where they were supposed to be. The way a workshop looks when someone has stopped pretending it's temporary. The person who'd brought him in was older than Devon had thought. Their hands had the same kind of marks Cantor's did, a small burn at the base of one thumb, ink under one nail that had been there long enough to become part of the cuticle. They sat on a stool worn into a shape only their body fit, and they set the talisman down on the part of the workbench they'd cleared in advance, like the spot had been waiting for it. "People like to call this place cursed," they said, working a bit of resin off their thumb. "It's a useful word. It keeps conversations short." Devon waited. He had the sense that filling the silence would count against him. "They say it because it's easier than admitting they've made a long string of small decisions, and not all of them with their eyes open." They glanced up. "Most of the performers here are preserving something. Youth, novelty, relevance. That takes energy. Personal energy. It runs out. So there isn't a curse." The authority considered that. "There's no spell, no binding, no appetite that we've ever found." They picked the talisman up again, turned it once. "You aren't preserving anything. You're not even supplying yourself." Devon felt a small, irrational flicker of pride. It was followed almost immediately by something colder. "You're sourcing," the authority went on, "cleanly, from somewhere that doesn't seem to mind." They set the talisman back down. "That's not common, and it's not something you learn." Devon thought of his father. The minute the world sees you can do something for free, it starts charging you for it. "What does it cost?" he said. "To be noticed by you?" The authority looked at him for a long moment. They didn't seem displeased. "That's the right question," they said. "It costs visibility. Once we know, others know. We don't keep secrets. We trade them too often for it to be efficient. The chapel will hear within the week. The badgers shortly after. The schools eventually, in their own time. And if I leave, You leave. We won't follow. We've watched people walk out of this room before. But the others, the ones you trade with. A small shrug. We don't control what they do. Devon nodded. He could feel his coat in his hand. He didn't remember picking it up. The room felt very ordinary. The authority watched him without expression. I should go home first, he said. The authority nodded once. The work will still be here. 7. The sentence. The kitchen smelled the same. That was the first thing. Boiled herbs and warm metal and whatever cheap solvent Cantor had been using that morning. The warm stone charm was on the bench where Cantor had left it, dim and quiet. Back to whatever state it had been in before Devon had ever picked it up. Cantor was at the table with another piece, a door charm with a hairline split running through one of the seals. He didn't look up when Devon came in. Devon sat across from him, without taking off his coat. They saw it, he said. Cantor didn't stop working. How many? A room. Then one person. The one person matters. Cantor nodded. He set the door charm down. He looked at the warm stone talisman, where it sat between them on the bench. Show me again. Devon picked it up. The talisman filled the way it had the first time. The same pressure shift. The same window opening somewhere in the house. Cantor watched it without expression. When Devon set it down, the hum took longer to leave than it had before. They want you, Cantor said. They didn't say want. They never do. Cantor wiped his hands on the rag. What did you tell them? That I wanted to come home first. That got a small nod. Maybe approval. Maybe just acknowledgement that the answer was reasonable. Do you go back? I don't know. Cantor was quiet for a while. He picked the door charm back up and worked the seal with a thin tool, the kind he used for old bindings that had to be eased open before they could be recut. His hands moved without him watching them. The cost of being seen by people like that, he said, isn't what they take. It's what they decide you are. He turned the door charm over. You go back. You're a boy who can do it for free. You don't go back. You're a boy who walked out. Either one is a story. They'll tell whichever one is most useful. What do I do? You do the work, whichever room. The work doesn't change. He didn't say anything else after that. The door charm took a small, reluctant edge under his hands. The kitchen smelled like solvent and tea, and somewhere outside a neighbor was shouting at a cat. Devon stayed for a few more days. He helped his father with 2 charms that had been sitting in the corner waiting for the kind of patience neither of them had had time for. He didn't try to fill anything else. The house held him the way the house had always held him, without asking, without comment. On the 4th morning, he picked up his coat again. Cantor was at the table. There'll be a second thing, he said, without looking up. There always is. What do you mean? The first ask is always the one they think they should make. The second is the one they actually wanted. He worked the tool gently. Pay attention to when it comes. And then? Then you decide. 8. What still runs? The authority was at the same workbench when Devon came back. They'd been expecting him within a window, it seemed. A stool had been set across from theirs, and the small workspace had been re-cleared in the days he'd been gone. They didn't ask about the trip. They didn't ask what he'd decided. They stood, picked up a key Devon hadn't seen the first time, and gestured him toward a door at the back of the room. It opened onto a space that read as storage only if you didn't know what you were looking at. Things were arranged carefully, dusted but not polished, labeled in a handwriting that assumed whoever read it would already understand the shorthand. Devon recognized the posture. This was where work went when no one wanted to explain why it had stopped. The authority walked ahead of him, touching nothing. These aren't broken, they're dormant. There's a difference. They stopped at the first piece, a ward assembly the size of a dining table, plates stacked and interlocked, etched with patterns that made Devon's eyes ache if he stared too long. It felt quiet the way a room feels when the power has gone out, but the wiring is still warm. This used to stabilize a border, not a dramatic one. Trade, mostly. Weather. Arguments that didn't need to escalate. A pause. We haven't been able to run it since before you were born. They didn't tell him what to do. They didn't have to. Devon stepped closer and placed his hand where it felt right, not where the diagram suggested, but where the thing itself seemed thinnest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the assembly woke, slow and steady, like something stretching after a long rest. The plates aligned. The hum returned, deeper than before, carrying weight without strain. The authority watched it come up. Whatever they had expected, this was it. They showed him another after that, then another. Smaller devices, larger ones. Some meant for crowds, some meant for places no one thought about until they failed. Each time it was the same. No recoil, no cost Devon could feel. Just the sense of a channel opening and closing politely, as if the universe itself were willing to be borrowed from as long as it was asked correctly. This is why places like this get watched, the authority said eventually. Not officially, but carefully. By the schools? By everyone. Badgers, the chapel, us. Anyone who needs proof instead of pedigree. They stopped near the door. The authority didn't quite look at him. There's a second piece, they said. A larger one. We'd like you to look at it before the others know what you can do. It would be useful to have a sense of your range before the conversations start. Devon felt it land. The first thing had been the dormant border. The second was range, before the conversations start. The first ask was the one they thought they should make. The second was the one they had wanted from the beginning. No, he said. The authority nodded once. They didn't argue. They didn't even seem disappointed. If anything, something around their shoulders settled, like the answer had been part of the test, and they'd seen it land before. All right, they said. Come back when you want to. Later, much later, he would leave again, then return, then leave again. Each time a little less ceremony involved. Each time the messages got shorter. Each time the door felt more like a door and less like an event. He would say no to other second things. He would say yes to a few. He would use the gift on his father's bench more often than on the dormant assemblies, and neither of them would discuss why. For now, he stood in the doorway with the hum of the border ward settling into place behind him, his phone lighting up in his pocket with a question that didn't need answering yet. You free next week? Once upon a tall tale. The Legend of Cinnamon Libby by Morgan Olson. Once Upon a Tall Tale. Season 0, Episode 2. Now, if you grew up in this country, you know how it works. 50 kingdoms, 50 castles, 50 crowns, and a king or queen or whatever in each one ruling by right of whoever got there first. The turnpike's a tournament ground 6 weekends a year. The tolls are tribute. If you want to drive from Camden to Newark, you better have a passport, a prayer, and a full tank of gas. Because the King of New Jersey's knights stop every car, and if your shield ain't paid up, you're walking. But you might not know about Cinnamon Libby. Most don't. The king she embarrassed paid good money to leave her out of the books. So sit down, pour yourself something brown. Let me tell it. Cinnamon Libby was born in the Pine Barrens of South Jersey, in a town called Hamilton. On a night so hot, the chickens laid hard-boiled eggs and the Jersey Devil came out of the trees just to fan himself. Her mama took one look at that red-faced, hollering baby and said, "Mercy, this child's got a fire in her." She wasn't wrong. By age 4, Libby had set 3 barns ablaze just by getting cross at a rooster. By age 7, she'd boiled a creek dry, shouting at a bullfrog. By age 12, she could light a cigarette by glaring at it, which is a useful skill but a hard one to explain to your priest. Her hair was the color of cinnamon dipped in cayenne, which is how she got the name. Her eyes were green like a thundercloud thinking it over. She was 5'0" in boots, but the boots were her daddy's, and when she walked across a wood floor, it sounded like a draft horse with opinions. The barrens were nobody's land. The King of New Jersey claimed them on his maps, but his knights wouldn't ride into them. Too many bogs, too many bears, too many old women who'd lived alone too long and gotten strange. It was the kind of place where you could grow up wild, and Libby did. She knew which mushrooms killed you, and which ones just made you see your dead grandmother. She knew which roads doubled back on themselves. She knew the song the pines made when a storm was coming, and she could whistle it back to scare the storm off. What she did not know, on the morning her phone first rang, was that anybody had her number. It was a Tuesday, and I know it was Tuesday because Tuesdays are when Libby cleaned out the smokehouse. And she was elbow deep in pig fat when her flip phone started buzzing on the workbench. Now Libby didn't have a phone plan. Libby didn't have service. The Pine Barrens didn't get bars, but the phone was buzzing all the same. And when she flipped it open, 3 women were already arguing on the line. "I'm telling you, she's ready. We should go. We should be moving. Mickey, listen, you can't just throw a child at a war and..." "She's not a child. She's 22. She's a child to us, Cat." "Hello," said Libby. The line went silent. Then the first voice, gravelly, like a woman who'd smoked since the Spanish-American War, said, "Cinnamon Libby, about damn time. This is Mickey." "And Cat," said the second, sharp, East Coast, the kind of voice that read 3 newspapers before breakfast. "And Maggie," said the third, and her voice was so soft, Libby had to press the phone to her ear. "Hello, sweetheart." "Who are you?" said Libby. "Friends," said Mickey. "Advisors," said Cat. "Family," said Maggie. "Are you my dead aunts?" said Libby, because her mama had 3 sisters and they'd all gone mysterious within the year. "Sure," said Mickey. "Why not?" "We've got a job for you, sweetheart," said Maggie. And here Mickey took over, and her voice changed, got loud, got bright, got like a brass band warming up. "Cinnamon Libby, the kingdoms are rotten, the kings are cruel, the queens are crueler. The women of this country have been getting the wrong end of the lance for 400 years, and we have decided, we 3, that you're the one to do something about it. You're going to ride. You're going to fight. You're going to make those crowned sons of..." "Mickey," said Maggie. "Those crowned gentlemen answer for what they've done, and you're going to..." "Hold on," said Libby, and her temper started rising the way bread rises, slow and certain. "Hold on, hold on, hold on. You're telling me that my dead aunts have been watching this whole time, and you waited until I was 22 to call?" "Cinnamon Libby," said Maggie. "Where were you when old man Pritchard did what he did? Where were you when the schoolmarm got paid half? Where were you when..." "Cinnamon Libby. When the widow Pemberton lost her house because her husband signed a paper she didn't even..." "Cinnamon Libby, hush." She hushed. Maggie's voice was the only one that did that to her, the only one that ever would. "We were here," said Maggie. "We were always here. The line wasn't open until now." "Why now?" said Libby. "Because you're listening," said Maggie. "Nobody else was." "Will you ride?" Libby looked down at her hands, which were still in pig fat. She looked up at the smokehouse roof, which had a hole in it she'd been meaning to fix. She looked out the door at the Pine Barrens, which stretched away forever. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, I'll ride." "Good girl," shouted Mickey, and Libby had to hold the phone away from her ear. Now Libby didn't have armor, so she went down to her daddy's barn and pulled his cast iron skillet off the wall, the big one, the 20-incher, and she lashed it across her chest with bridle leather. She didn't have a helmet, so she took the stew pot. She didn't have greaves, so she wrapped her shins in old license plates. New Jersey license plates, naturally, yellow and black, the colors of the kingdom she was about to embarrass. She didn't have a sword. "You need a sword," said Cat on the phone. "I got a fence post," said Libby. "You need a sword, sweetheart," said Maggie. "There's one waiting for you," said Mickey. Listen close. There's a chapel in Mount Holly. Behind the altar, under the floor, 6 feet down, there's a sword with 5 rust spots on it shaped like a hand. It's been there 200 years waiting on you. How do you know? Because we put it there, said Mickey. And Cat said Mickey sharply. And Mickey said, well, we did. So Libby rode. She rode out of the barrens on her mule Aggravation, who hated everybody equally, which Libby considered fair. She rode up Route 206 with her skillet on her chest and her stew pot on her head and her fence post across her saddle. People stopped their pickup trucks to stare. A knight of New Jersey in full plate at the Hamilton toll booth took one look at her and let her pass without paying tribute, because he was laughing too hard to remember the words. She got to the chapel in Mount Holly at sundown, kicked open the door, walked up the aisle, pulled up the floorboards behind the altar with her bare hands. She didn't even bring a crowbar, she just ripped them up and dug down 6 feet through dirt and old bones and one very surprised mole. And there at the bottom was a sword. It had 5 rust spots on it shaped like a hand. She picked it up. It was lighter than the fence post. Oh, she said. Oh, yeah. Told you, said Mickey. Word spreads quick in a kingdom. By the time Libby got to Trenton, the King of New Jersey had heard about the skillet girl with the buried sword, and he sent his herald out to meet her at the castle gate. Now the King of New Jersey at this time was named Charles the Lukewarm on account of his personality. He'd been crowned by accident. There was a thing with his cousin and a horse and a misunderstanding about a will, and he'd been losing a war to the Empress of New York for 6 years running. The Empress had taken Hoboken. She'd taken Jersey City. She had her knights camped in Newark eating his cheesesteaks. Charles the Lukewarm was 3 months from losing his crown, and when Libby walked into his throne room with a fence post over her shoulder and a sword on her hip and a stew pot under her arm, he looked at her like a drowning man looks at a thrown rope. You, he said. Are you the one? I'm somebody, said Libby. Tell him yes, said Mickey on the phone. Tell him carefully yes, said Cat. Sweetheart, just be polite, said Maggie. I'm the one, said Libby, and I got conditions. The king leaned forward. Name them. 1. The widow Pemberton gets her house back. 2. The schoolmarms get paid the same as the schoolmasters. 3. Any law in the books that says a woman can't own a thing, vote on a thing, or laugh as loud as she pleases, gone. 4. Done, said the king. Done, 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 done. Just take Newark back. 4. I want it in writing. He wrote it. She took Newark back in 11 days. I won't dwell on the battles, friend, because tall tales aren't war stories and you didn't come here for the body count. But know this. Libby rode at the front with her skillet on her chest and her sword in her hand, and behind her came every woman in New Jersey who'd ever been told to sit down. 3,000 by Camden, 8,000 by New Brunswick, 20,000 by the time she crossed into Newark, and the Empress of New York's knights took one look at that crowd and one look at the red-headed girl at the front of it, and remembered they had pressing engagements in Albany. Hoboken came back. Jersey City came back. The Empress sued for peace, and Libby made her sign a paper saying she'd pay the New Jersey schoolmarms back wages for 40 years. And the Empress signed it because Libby was holding a sword in one hand and a skillet in the other, and the look on her face suggested she'd use both. Charles the Lukewarm threw a feast. He gave Libby a medal. He offered her a horse to replace Aggravation, who'd kicked one of the king's footmen and was now in disgrace. Libby refused the horse. She kept the mule. That night, on the phone. He doesn't mean it, said Cat. Mean what? Said Libby. Any of it. The medal. The thanks. He's going to throw you over the second it's convenient. Cat, said Maggie. She needs to know, Maggie. I know, said Libby. I can tell. He looks at me like I'm a coat he borrowed. Smart girl, said Mickey. Here's how it happened. There was a small kingdom, Delaware, making trouble on the southern border. Charles the Lukewarm sent Libby down to handle it, with a force of 200 knights, which was about 1/10 of what she needed. She handled it anyway, because she was Cinnamon Libby, and she could handle a hurricane with a hand towel. But on the ride back, in a little town called Pennsville, the King of Delaware's men ambushed her. They'd known she was coming. They'd known the road. They'd known the hour. Somebody had told them. They took her in chains to the dungeon under Dover Castle, and they sent a ransom demand to Trenton. 300,000 gold pieces for the return of your champion. Charles the Lukewarm read the letter. Charles the Lukewarm folded the letter. Charles the Lukewarm put the letter in a drawer. And Charles the Lukewarm did nothing. He didn't pay. He didn't negotiate. He didn't send a knight, a messenger, a nasty look. He sat in his castle in Trenton and drank wine, and waited, because, and here's the part that'll cook your blood, he'd decided Libby was getting too popular. The women loved her, the peasants loved her, half his own knights loved her. If she came back from Delaware in glory one more time, she was going to be queen, and he was going to be a footnote. So he let her rot. She rotted for 4 months in that dungeon. And on the morning of the 121st day, the phone rang. She'd kept it under her tongue. She'd hidden it from the guards. She'd charged it on a torch sconce that had a loose wire. She flipped it open. "Cinnamon Libby," said Mickey. "He's not coming." "I know," said Libby. "He was never coming," said Cat. "I know," said Libby. "Sweetheart," said Maggie, "you can break out. You have it in you. You always have." "I know," said Libby. And her temper, which had been banked for 4 months like a coal under ash, started to rise. It rose till the chains got hot. It rose till the chains got red. It rose till the iron softened and ran down her wrists like syrup. And Cinnamon Libby stood up in her cell, and she was so angry that she ground her teeth. And I mean ground them, friend, like a millstone on wheat. And her teeth came out, all of them, everyone. And she spat them into her hand and looked at them, 32 pearls in a palm full of blood. "Huh," she said. She put the teeth in her pocket. She walked through the cell door. The door, mind you, the iron door. She walked through it like a curtain. And she walked up the stairs. And she walked out of Dover Castle. And she walked all the way back to Trenton, 300 miles, on bare feet. Behind her in every town, the women came pouring out of their houses again. And this time they were not laughing. They were quiet. That was worse. She got to Trenton Castle on a Sunday morning. The drawbridge was down. The guards saw her coming, and they laid down their pikes, because they'd heard, and because they could see her face. She walked across the bridge. She walked through the gate. She walked up the steps. She walked into the throne room, and Charles the Lukewarm was sitting on his throne eating an orange. He saw her. He dropped the orange. "Cinnamon Libby," he said, "I can explain." "Charles," she said, "open your mouth." "What?" "Open your mouth." He did, because there was something in her voice that did not allow for any other choice. She reached into her pocket. She took out her teeth, her own 32 teeth, that she'd ground out in her cell in Dover, and she pressed them up into his gums, one by one, where his own teeth were. Not gentle, not quick, one by one. And she said, "These are mine. You wear them. You walk around wearing my teeth till the day you die, so that every time you bite an apple, every time you kiss your wife, every time you smile at a baby, you remember whose mouth those came out of and why." Then she punched him. Once, square, and every single tooth of his went flying out of his head. He fell off the throne. She sat down on it. "I'm queen now," she said to the room. Nobody argued. "Cinnamon Libby," said Maggie on the phone, very softly. "Oh, sweetheart." "I know, Maggie," said Libby. "I know. Now you'd think that's the end. It's not." The other kings got nervous. A peasant girl had taken a throne by walking through a door. The Empress of New York remembered that paper she'd signed and decided she didn't like it. The King of Pennsylvania, who was Charles the Lukewarm's brother-in-law, declared a holy war. The King of Delaware, who'd held her in chains, declared another holy war on top of the first one. They marched on Trenton together, 3 armies, 60,000 men, and they took the castle in a week because Libby let them, because Libby had a feeling about how this needed to end. They put her on a pyre in the courtyard. They piled the wood, oak and pine and birch, dry as bone. They poured oil on it. They tied her to the stake with chains they'd had specially made. Cold iron, blessed iron, iron from a meteor that fell in 1842. They wanted to be sure. The three kings stood on the castle balcony to watch. Charles the Lukewarm was not there. Charles the Lukewarm was hiding in a barn in Hopewell, and that's where he stayed. The crowd in the courtyard was silent. The women stood at the front. They did not cry. They had stopped crying months ago. A herald lit the torch. He walked to the pyre. He put the torch to the kindling. The kindling caught, the wood caught, the oil caught. And Cinnamon Libby, chained to the stake in the middle of a fire so hot it cracked the cobblestones, did not catch. Her dress didn't burn. Her hair didn't burn. The skin on her arms didn't even pink up. She stood there in the middle of a roaring blaze, and she looked up at the three kings on the balcony, and she smiled, and her smile was empty of teeth. She'd never replace them, never would. And it was the most terrifying smile any of them had ever seen. "Y'all forget," she said, and her voice carried over the fire like a bell. "I've been on fire my whole life." The chains melted off her. She walked out of the pyre. The crowd parted. She walked up to the castle. She walked up the stairs. She walked onto the balcony. The three kings ran. She let them run. She let them go all the way down the stairs and out the gate and onto the turnpike. And she watched them go, and then she turned to the crowd in the courtyard, the women at the front, still silent. And she said, "All right, New Deal. They say Cinnamon Libby ruled New Jersey for 41 years, and she never wore teeth and she never wore a crown. She wore the skillet on her chest till the day she died. She rewrote every law in the kingdom, and she set them in stone in the courtyard at Trenton, where the pyre had been, and the stones are still there, and the writing is still legible. And the first law on the first stone reads, 'No woman in this kingdom shall ever again be told to hush by anyone but herself.'" There's a small footnote on that one. It says, "Maggie accepted." And the story didn't stop at the New Jersey line. It couldn't. It spread up the coast and down the coast and over the mountains, and in every kingdom the women heard about Libby, they started looking at their own kings sideways. There were riots in Pennsylvania. There were riots in Virginia. There were riots in kingdoms Libby had never heard of, and in every one of them, somewhere in the crowd, was a woman with a cast iron skillet she hadn't owned the week before. They did not all win, but they all rode. When she finally died, at 104, the phone rang one last time. "Cinnamon Libby," said Mickey. "Come on home." "I got some notes," said Libby. "We know," said Kat. "We've been keeping a list," said Mickey. "Sweetheart," said Maggie. "Hush, come inside. We got time." And she did. And they did. That, friends, is the gospel truth, or near enough to it that the difference don't matter. And if you ever drive the turnpike at sundown, northbound, just past exit 7A, when the sky over the pine barrens turns the color of cinnamon dipped in cayenne, roll your window down. Listen close. You might hear a phone ring. Don't pick it up unless you're ready. Once upon a tall tale.
Warbands of Wall Street. Or the day orcs discovered derivatives and everyone calmed down. Once Upon a Tall Tale Season 0, Episode 3. Part 1. People often ask whether the markets became more violent after the orcs arrived. That question always amuses me. The markets were violent long before we showed up. Humans simply had the habit of describing their violence in polite language. They called conquest expansion. They called raids acquisitions. They called surrender restructuring. I did not change the system. I only renamed it. People sometimes assume orc language is primitive. It isn't. We simply refuse to invent extra words to hide unpleasant truths. Humans call a collapsing company a restructuring. We call it a defeat. Humans say strategic acquisition. We say raid. The vocabulary is smaller. The honesty is larger. That difference unsettled the humans more than the headbutts ever did. When I first arrived on Wall Street, the men in suits thought I was a novelty, something amusing for the diversity committee to photograph. The women thought I was a liability the legal department would eventually have to bury. They were wrong on both counts. I had two advantages. First, I could smell fear in a balance sheet. Second, I had spent most of my life in cultures that did not pretend conflict was mathematics. Finance turned out to be very familiar territory. Back then, I was only an analyst, though even that word struck me as dishonest. What I was really doing was measuring hordes, estimating siege length, and calculating which enemies would collapse first if you tighten the right pressure. Humans had softer terms for these things. They always do. The first real change came when I stopped calling our firm an investment group and started calling it a warband. At first, this was meant as mockery. By the end of the quarter, it was on internal documents. Humans laugh right up until a thing begins to work. The first time we used the word raid out loud, the humans thought we were joking. 3 months later, a rival firm tried to suffocate us quietly. They began shorting our debt before sunrise, hoping we would collapse before anyone noticed. So we did what warbands do. We struck first. The entire raid lasted 9 minutes. 9. By the time the opening bell rang, we owned enough of their debt to call it in immediately. Their credit lines froze. Their board panicked. Their stock began to fall like a wounded animal. Across the street, their lawyers were eating lunch. They finished their sandwiches before anyone told them their client no longer existed. I went over myself, watched the lawyers. One complained about pickles, while another one was filling out fantasy basketball. It was one of the most glorious moments seeing them realize the round of drinks I sent was notice their own company was no longer there. By mid-afternoon, their entire firm belonged to us. I kept none of the lawyers because they were lazy. I feed mine and know where they are all the time and pay them so well, they will tell me if they are being headhunted. Only a direct assault on my body is stupider. At least, that would be honorable. Humans still say we acquired them. Orcs say we took their head. Those were also the years when I married my elf wife. It was partly love and partly status. Success does strange things to men. Humans buy paintings they do not understand. Orcs buy vineyards they never visit. I married elegance. She was pale and precise and spoke several languages without ever raising her voice. She disliked the word warband intensely. She preferred phrases like consortium and strategic alliance. She believed language softened the world. That is a very elvish belief. We had a child together, a clever boy, quick on his feet, quick in the eyes. Naturally, I assumed he would inherit the warband. Children rarely cooperate with their parents' long-term planning. My son wanted nothing to do with finance. No interest in acquisitions or leverage or the delicate art of recognizing when a rival firm had already bled itself dry. He wanted rollerblades. He wanted stair rails and concrete plazas and the admiration of strangers holding cameras. To this day, I do not fully understand it, though I respect the balance required. He films little moving pictures of himself jumping railings outside the exchange tower. Apparently, millions of people watch these recordings. It is a strange world. Later, I lost my wife. That was my fault. The woman involved was an orc from the interior territories, one of the last I knew who still lived mostly outside the machinery of cities. She was stronger than I was. Even then, she hunted part of the year with her hands and considered quarterly reporting a kind of indoor sport. She was the only person I have ever met who did not want anything from me. My wife found her embarrassing. The difference proved decisive. Elves leave marriages very gracefully. They take half the furniture and nearly all of the reputation. But my rollerblading son remained, and not long after that, the other child arrived. My bastard, pure orc blood. That child is the reason I am telling this story. But to explain him properly, I must first explain Arthur Pike. Arthur had been working in finance before the Warbands formed. A dangerous human. Quiet, patient. The sort of man who studies a room the way a wolf studies weather. Most humans who tried to join our culture failed quickly. They liked the language, but not the honesty. They wanted the reputation of danger without the responsibility that comes with it. Arthur Pike was different. He learned orc. He ate with the warband. He married an orc woman and began raising half-orc children who will almost certainly become terrifying adults. Soon he spoke orc, better than some orcs. The younger apprentices hated him for it. Young orcs raised inside a system sometimes confuse inheritance with strength. One of them, a thin little blade named Skren, decided one afternoon that Arthur Pike had been wearing orc culture long enough. He walked onto the trading floor, carrying 2 knives and a short axe. More weapons than wisdom. The room grew quiet. Skren spoke first. "You speak our language," he said in orc. "But you are still a human, wearing borrowed teeth." Arthur Pike studied him calmly. Then he asked a simple question. "Are you certain?" The boy said yes. Arthur looked around the room. "Is everyone ready?" he asked in orc. Several of the warband nodded. Then he repeated the question in English for the humans. "Is everyone ready?" Clarity first. Witnesses second. Then Arthur Pike stepped forward and delivered the most beautiful headbutt I have ever seen. Not wild, not angry. Precise. His forehead struck the boy's nose with a sound like 2 stones meeting underwater. The knives hit the floor first. Then the axe. Then the boy. Arthur followed him down, pinned him neatly with one forearm, and bit the side of the boy's neck just hard enough to bring the old law into the room. "Yield!" The boy yielded. Arthur stood up and went back to work. Someone recorded the entire event. The video circulates even now. Humans watch it for the violence. Orcs watch it for the technique. Among the Warbands, we no longer say headbutt. If someone ends an argument decisively, we say, "He gave him a pike." That was the day I knew Arthur Pike was the finest lieutenant I had ever seen. And that is exactly the problem. You see, Arthur Pike could defeat me in combat now. I know this. Age is a market pressure like any other. Eventually, everybody corrects downward. Arthur would win perhaps 65 times out of 100. But he has never challenged me. Not once. That is the only thing that troubles me. A lieutenant must understand the chief's will. Arthur does that perfectly. He commands raids. He disciplines the warband. He never lies to the numbers. But a chief must also feel the empty seat before anyone else does. Arthur does not. And that leaves me with a problem. I would trust Arthur Pike with my warband, which is exactly why he must face my blood. My bastard son has none of Arthur's polish, but he has instinct. So I made the rules simple. If he wants the warband, he must defeat Arthur Pike in hand-to-hand combat. Arthur accepted this immediately. That is one reason I trust him. My son said nothing for a long time. Then he nodded. People say that makes me barbaric. Perhaps. But the markets were barbaric long before the orcs arrived. We simply stopped pretending otherwise. On the morning the duel was held, the sun rose red behind the towers. Two figures stepped onto the roof of the exchange building. Arthur Pike and my son. My other son, the elf boy, was outside filming rollerblade tricks on the marble steps. Millions of people watched that video later. No one recorded the other one, but I watched it. I can hear him on the stairs. Good.
Part 2, the last lesson. Or, what I learned from the man I killed. The chief left me a document. I read it the night after the duel. I read it again the next morning. I have read it many times since. Orcs do not write memoirs. They consider the form indulgent. The chief wrote one anyway and gave it to me, and the gift was not the document. The gift was that he knew I would understand what the document was for. I had studied orc culture for 23 years before I met him. I had read everything available in 3 languages. I had married into a clan. I had raised children who will be more orc than I will ever be. I spoke the language well enough that young orcs found it offensive. None of that is the same as knowing. The chief understood this about me. He never said so. To say so would have been cruel, and he was not cruel. He simply taught me every day in the only way orcs teach anything, which is by doing it in front of you and letting you watch. The final lesson was the duel. I did not understand this at the time. I thought I was fighting his son. I thought the chief was testing his blood against his lieutenant in the old way, and I would win or lose and the warband would go to the better fighter. That is what the document appeared to describe. The document was lying, not in the human sense. Orcs do not lie that way. The document was telling the truth in a shape I was not yet equipped to read. I had to kill the chief before I could read it correctly. That, I now understand, was the point. His son knew. I see that now. The boy nodded when the terms were set, and I read the nod as acceptance, which it was, but acceptance of what I had not yet realized. He was not accepting the chance to inherit. He was accepting the role of the blade. His father needed a witnessed death by a worthy hand, and the old law required a challenger of the blood, and the boy understood his function and agreed to it. He died well. I did not understand until afterward how well. The chief wanted to die. That is the wrong word. Humans want things, and the wanting is full of need. The chief was past need. The chief was ready, and readiness in an orc is a kind of joy I have spent my life trying to describe, and cannot, because the describing is human, and the thing being described is not. I felt it in him on the roof. I felt it before he moved. I had fought him in training 100 times, and I knew his body. And on that morning, his body was singing. And I understood, somewhere underneath my training and my scholarship and my fluency, that he was not afraid and not resigned and not brave. He was excited. And because I understood that, because I felt it in him and recognized it without translating it, I was, for the first time in my life, fully inside the culture I had spent my life studying. The chief taught me orc by being orc at me until I became it. But the lesson underneath the lesson was something else. The chief was excited about a thing he could not say to any orc still living. The shape of orc could change. He had spent his life proving that orc honesty could survive Wall Street. The harder thing, the thing he could not do himself, was proving that Wall Street could survive orc honesty, that the Warband could last past its founder, that a culture built on confrontation could learn the patience required to outlive a single lifetime. He needed someone soft in the places he was hard. He chose me because I was soft. The orcs around him would never have allowed it. They would have called it dilution. They would have said the human had stolen something pure and watered it down for the long century. They would have meant it. And they would have been wrong, and the chief knew they would be wrong. And he also knew that he would not be alive to argue the point. So he wrote the document instead. He wrote it because he knew I would do things he never could. I would file paperwork. I would settle quarrels before they reached the trading floor. I would protect young orcs from the worst of themselves the way no one had protected him. I would use the human tools he had refused on principle his entire life, and the warband would last because of it. He knew this would cost something. He knew the orcs would mutter. He knew some of them would never forgive him for choosing me. He chose me anyway, because he understood the only immortality available to a chief is the one that does not require him to be there. The Warband of Wall Street will exist in 50 years. It will exist in 100. It will not look like him by then. It will not sound like him. The orcs of that future will speak more softly than he did, and they will negotiate more than they fight, and they will use words he would have called dishonest, and they will be, in every way that matters, his. He knew this. He was excited about it. That was the lesson he could not teach any orc. That was the lesson he taught me. The Warband is mine now. I am writing this because he wrote his, and the tradition he started one afternoon as a joke about renaming things has become somehow the spine of how we hold our own lives in this profession. He renamed an investment group a Warband. I am renaming grief. Among the Warbands, when a chief dies well, we will no longer say he was killed. We will say he taught his last lesson.
Once upon a tall tale.
The moon has always belonged to Cleveland. By Morgan Olson. Once Upon a Tall Tale. Season 0, Episode 4, 1. The Men Who Made the Claim. The men in Cleveland said the moon was theirs. They said it the way a man lays claim to a patch of dirt, or a herd of cattle, or a woman he swears by. Loud, certain, and ready to back it with their fists. In the yards by the lake, where the rails bent and groaned like old bones, they gathered. Whole gangs, rough-necked and coal-dusted, standing in the cinders with their shirts open to the night. The moon hung over them like a silver coin just out of reach, and every man swore he had the right to pocket it. They sang about her, not songs fit for churches, but chants hammered flat as iron, rolling out of busted lungs. One side shouted about the night she rose fat and red over the smokestacks. Another side swore she belonged to the east side, where she lit the crooked river. Each verse was a stake in the ground. The moon rose here, the moon rose for us. The moon belongs to Cleveland. When words failed, they fought. Chains swinging, bottles smashed into razors, boots grinding men into the gravel. The yard became an altar of busted teeth and blood. Still, above it all, the moon stayed steady, her pale face watching like she'd seen 1,000 such arguments before. By dawn, the fires in the barrels burned low. The last of the shouting cracked into silence. Men staggered home, shoulders torn, eyes swollen shut. No one remembered whose chant had lasted longest, or whose fists had drawn the most blood. But when they looked up at the sky, they all saw the same thing. The moon, still hanging there, waiting for Cleveland and Cleveland alone. That was proof enough. Proof a city needs. 2. The man who spoke first. His name was Czeslaw Duda, though nobody called him that anymore. They called him Duda the Pole, and he wore the name like a scar, which is to say he wore it without complaint. Duda had come to Cleveland in 1919 with $12 sewn into the lining of his boot and a prayer in a language the city didn't speak. He'd found work in the rail yards within a week and found God there too. Not the God of churches, but the God of iron and repetition, of the body learning its limits and then exceeding them until the limits became another man's problem. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders the way a river is broad, not for show, but because the land demanded it. His hands were the color of old brick. His face looked like it had been roughed out of something harder than skin, then left unfinished on purpose. Duda didn't argue about the moon. That was the thing. While other men shouted and shoved and drew blood over whose neighborhood she favored, Duda simply watched her. He watched her the way a man watches something he owns without needing to say so. One night, Mickey Rourke's crew, not the actor, the other one, the one who ran collection along the East Docks, came into the yard looking for a fight they could win. They were 7 men carrying themselves like they'd already won. They walked in singing their claim. The moon rises over Whiskey Island, rises for the rivermen, rises for us. Duda put down his coffee tin. He cracked his knuckles, not for drama, though that's how the story always got told later, but because they'd gone stiff in the cold and he needed them working. He stepped forward and the singing stopped. What followed lasted 3 minutes and changed the geometry of the yard. 2 of Rourke's men ran. 2 didn't get up. 2 more sat against the fence holding various parts of themselves, reconsidering their choices. The 7th one, a kid, really, 19 or 20, with a face not yet ruined, stood his ground. He was shaking. He looked up at the moon, then back at Duda. "She rose over my block first," the kid said. "I seen her every night since I was little." Duda looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he looked up at the moon himself. She was full that night, or close to it, high and still and cold as a coin left on a dead man's eye. "I know," Duda said. "She rises over all of it. That's how it works." "Then why do you say she's yours?" the kid asked. "Because somebody has to," Duda said. "And if it ain't us, it's Pittsburgh." He picked up his coffee tin. The kid sat down on the gravel. Above them both, the moon continued her ancient business, indifferent and faithful and bright. 3. What the moon knew. She had been watching Cleveland since before it was Cleveland, since it was just the long gray margin where the lake surrendered to the land and the land didn't know what to make of itself. She had watched the Eries before they vanished, watched the French come and argue over furs, watched Cleveland, 1A, the man, the general, plant his stake on the bluff and announce something that hadn't happened yet. She had watched the fires of the ironworks come up and turn the night sky amber, so that when she rose through the color of heated metal and the whole lake caught it and glittered. She knew what these men were doing when they fought over her. She had watched men do the same thing over rivers, mountains, women, the direction of the wind. It was the most human thing there was. To see something enormous and timeless and wild, and to say mine, because the alternative was to admit that nothing was yours, and a man who admits that tends to stop working. And she needed them to keep working, not because she required it. She was the moon. She required nothing except the gravity of the earth, and the earth was not in the habit of asking permission. But she had watched long enough to understand the equation. The men worked because they believed the night worked for them. They hauled iron and laid rail and poured slag because somewhere above all that fire was a pale face that recognized them personally, that rose for their street and not the next one, that confirmed, without language, without anything so small as language, that their life in this city was cosmically endorsed. Take that away, and you had men who stopped working at the right speed and started thinking at the wrong speed. She had seen what happened then. It wasn't good for anybody, so she let them claim her. She stayed where she was. She rose fat and red over the smokestacks when the season called for it, and she went thin and silver in the deep of winter, and she disappeared entirely once a month so they'd miss her, and she always came back. That's what love is in its most functional form. She knew that. The men were beginning to. The night they nearly lost her. There was a winter, 1934, the coldest anyone alive could remember, when the moon went dark for 3 weeks running and the city lost its nerve. Not all at once. It started at the edges, the way rot starts at the edges of a thing. Men stopped singing in the yards. The chants dried up. Shifts turned silent, except for the work sounds, the ring of metal, the exhale of machines, and that silence had a weight to it that men carried home and couldn't set down. The fights stopped too, which should have been a relief, but wasn't. The fights had been a grammar, a way of saying things that needed saying. Without them, the men walked around full of unspent language, and unspent language turns inward. In those 3 weeks, a man named Boyle, Thomas Boyle, who ran the night crew on the third line and was known for laughing at things that weren't funny, which is a survival skill. Boyle started drinking at a speed that alarmed even the other drinkers. He showed up to his shift smelling like a closed room, eyes tracking something that wasn't there. One night he sat on an upturned bucket and told the sky it could go to hell. Nobody argued with him. Nobody knew what to say. The moon came back on a Thursday in February. She came back enormous, swollen with cold light, and hung so low over the lake that men said afterward you could have reached her from a ladder. She turned the ice on the Cuyahoga into hammered silver. She lit up the yard so bright you could read a newspaper, if you had a newspaper, if you had anything worth reading. Boyle was sitting on the same bucket. He looked up at her. "There she is," he said. Then he started crying, which nobody would ever mention again, because that's how the yards worked. Some things happened and then didn't happen. "There she is," he said again, and his voice had the quality of a man who has been lost and is pretending he wasn't. The rest of the crew looked up. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The moon sat above them, patient and enormous, and lit from within by something that had nothing to do with them, and everything to do with them. Then a man named Kowalczyk started the chant. Low at first, just under his breath, the old words, "She rose here first, she rose for us." Then the man next to him picked it up, and the man next to him, until it moved through the whole third line like fire through dry grass. The yard came alive again. The work resumed. Boyle wiped his face with the back of his hand and stood up from the bucket, and nobody said a word about any of it. But they remembered. In the way that men remember things they don't discuss. In their bodies, in the way they looked up a little quicker after that, never taking for granted that she'd still be there. 5. The daughters who inherited the claim. The men didn't know their daughters were watching. Magda Kowalczyk was 9 years old the first time she saw her father come home from the yards with blood on his knuckles and moonlight in his eyes. She watched him from the stairs while her mother heated water on the stove. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at his hands like they were documents he was trying to read. What happened? She wanted to ask. But she didn't, because she already knew. The moon happened. The moon was always happening. She grew up watching it. She watched it from the yards themselves, eventually, When the war came, and the men went, and the women took the shifts, and nobody talked about how strange that was, or how right it felt. She watched it from the same cinders, breathing the same coal dust, her shoulders learning the same grammar of repetition that her fathers had. She didn't fight about it. That's not to say she didn't understand the fighting. She understood it perfectly, but she had her own ways of claiming. When the night shift ended, and the sky started going that deep blue that means dawn is thinking about arriving, she'd stand at the edge of the yard and look up. Just look. Not singing, not swinging anything. Just meeting the moon's gaze with her own. She's ours, she'd think. Not just the men's, ours. The moon, for her part, looked back with the same steady silver face she gave everyone, which was its own kind of answer. Magda had a daughter, Lena, who had a daughter, Petra, who still lives on the east side in a house that needs painting and has a yard that backs up to what used to be a rail spur. Petra doesn't know most of this history, but on clear nights she stands at the kitchen window with her coffee going cold in her hands and looks at the moon over the rooftops and feels something she doesn't have words for. The words exist. She just hasn't been told them yet. 6. How the claim survived the dying of the yards. The yards closed. Not all at once. Cleveland doesn't do anything all at once. That's not its character. It does things slowly, stubbornly, the way a bad winter goes. You think it's breaking, and then it turns around and bites you again. The third line closed in 1967. The main yard stopped operations in 1978. By the early 80s, the whole complex was a cathedral of rust and silence, and the men who had worked it were scattered, retired, relocated, dead, or sitting in bars explaining to whoever would listen what it had been like. The chants went with them. You don't chant in a bar the same way you chant in a rail yard. The acoustics are wrong. The solidarity is different. In a bar, you're already inside, already sheltered, and the moon is just a thing you see through glass between drinks. But the claim didn't die. That was the surprise. It moved. Like everything in Cleveland, it moved and adapted and refused to give up ground even when it was losing ground. It moved into the bars. Yes, quieter there, more spoken than sung. It moved into the neighborhoods, into the specific way a man might point at the moon over Lake Erie on a summer night and say to his kid, "You see that? That's ours." It moved into the mouths of people who had never laid rail or hauled slag and couldn't have told you one name of a man who had, into the sports arenas, the neighborhoods, the blood. The moon noticed, or, to be accurate, the moon remained, which is the same thing. She came up over the west side and the east side and the flats and the heights. She lit the lake and the river and the empty lots where the yards used to be, where the concrete foundations still hold the shape of things that no longer exist. She rose red over the stadium and silver over the bridges and pale and enormous over the neighborhoods where the daughters of the yard workers raised their own children and watched the sky with the same upward tilt that had no name but was inherited. She never went to Pittsburgh, never wandered to Detroit, never fled across the flat fields of Ohio. She stayed because she was claimed. Because men had bled for her, and women had watched for her in silence, and children had been told in sideways ways that she was theirs, and the word had moved through the city the way water moves through old pipes, underground, invisible, unremarkable, essential. 7. The last chant. There's a bar on the west side. You'd know it if you've spent time in Cleveland, and if you haven't, it doesn't matter what the name is. Where on certain nights, when the moon is full and someone has had enough to lose their self-consciousness but not enough to lose their voice, the chant still happens. It starts small. A man or a woman at the bar, half talking to themselves. She rose here first. Someone at a table picks it up without thinking, the way you pick up a tune you didn't know you knew. Then another. Then the whole bar, or close to it. And outside the moon is doing what she does, enormous and patient over the rooftops. Nobody explains it. Nobody could. It's not about understanding. It's about blood memory, about the thing that happens when a claim becomes a city's character and lives past the conditions that created it. She rose here, She rose for us. The city proves its myths the old way, through repetition, through blood, through the willingness to say the same thing so many times it becomes true. The moon is Cleveland's because Cleveland said so, loudly and at great personal cost, for long enough that the saying became the fact. That's how the tale is told, in every bar where the smoke clings thick, and every night a man or a woman looks out over the yards that aren't there anymore. The moon has always belonged to Cleveland, because men bled for her, and women watched for her, and children inherited the watching, and the city kept saying her name, and she never turned her face away.
Once upon a tall tale.
Sundermill. Once Upon a Tall Tale Season 0, Episode 5. They say a lot of things in Sundermill, and most of them are written down somewhere, which is the trouble. 1. The Crescent. There were 11 rooms in the Crescent Hotel. On the 14th of September, 1889, 4 of them had been reserved in writing by the same hand for 4 people who had never met. The proprietor of the Crescent was a man named Halverson, who had once been a Lutheran and was now nothing in particular. He stood behind his desk that afternoon and watched them come in, one at a time, on 4 different conveyances, and he greeted each of them as they came through the door, and he did not, at any point, mention that he had been expecting them. He had been instructed, in writing, not to. The first to arrive was the woman. She came in on the stagecoach from the east. She was 41. She wore a divided skirt of her own making and a gray coat that had been brushed within an inch of its life. She set a small carpet bag on Halverson's desk, and the desk noted, in some private way of its own, that the bag was heavier than it should have been. "Doss," she said. "Mrs. W. Doss, I believe you have a room." Halverson looked at the register he had already prepared. "I do, Mrs. Doss. I would like a bath." "You shall have one. I would like it hot." "Madam," Halverson said, "I would not dare offer you anything else." Mrs. Doss looked at him for a long moment, and then, without any change of expression that a man not paying attention would have seen, decided that she liked him. Halverson, who had been a hotel proprietor for 19 years, registered the decision the way a sailor registers a shift in the wind. He gave her the key to room 4. The second was the priest. He came in on a borrowed horse from the south, on the road from Tucson, and he had ridden hard enough that the horse was not, in any strict sense, his fault, but was, in every practical sense, his problem. He arranged for it with the livery boy before he came inside. Halverson observed this through the front window with approval. A man who saw to his horse before he saw to himself was a man Halverson was prepared to extend a number of small courtesies. He came through the door carrying a single black valise. The valise sat at his feet at the desk in a way that suggested neither lightness nor heaviness, but a settled and continuous awareness. "Brell," he said. "Father Cassian Brell, from Vicksburg. Father. You have a room for me." "I do, Father. I should like, if it is no trouble, the loan of a Bible." Halverson, who had 3, hesitated for a beat over which to offer. There was the heavily annotated one that had belonged to a previous proprietor, which was the most interesting. There was the gilt-edged one a circuit judge had left behind in 1884, which was the most decorative, and there was the small plain one with no marks in it at all, which Halverson had bought for $1 in St. Louis and had read precisely twice. "I have 3, he said. Father Brell looked at him. "The one with the fewest pencil annotations," he said, "if you have one. I find I read better without other people's underlinings." Halverson, who had not known until that moment that this was a thing a man could prefer, made a small private note and gave him the plain one. He gave him the key to room 6. The third was the man with the cleft chin. He came in on a different borrowed horse from the north. By way, Halverson surmised from the dust pattern on his coat, of the rail spur and then the cross-country trail, which was a route a man took when he did not want to be on a stagecoach with other people. He came through the door with no luggage at all. He had a small leather satchel under one arm which contained, by the look of it, less than a clean shirt. "Quinn," he said. "A. Quinn. Mr. Quinn. You got a room?" "I have." Mr. Quinn looked around the lobby of the Crescent, at the desk, at the staircase, at the small portrait of a previous owner of the establishment, at the door to the dining room, with the appraising and slightly disappointed expression of a man assessing the angles of a building he might, under certain circumstances, need to leave through a window of. "What time," he said, "do the saloons close?" "They don't." Mr. Quinn nodded, as if this were the answer he had hoped for, but not expected. "What time," he said, "do you close?" "I don't either." Mr. Quinn nodded again and signed the register, A. Quinn, and Halverson noticed, because it was the kind of thing he noticed, that the Q was the shape a man made when he had been signing a different letter for most of his life and had switched. He gave him the key to room 9. The fourth came in on her own 2 feet. She walked in from the east, from the direction of the rail spur 6 miles out, dusty to the knees, hatless, carrying nothing. She was 17. She was, Halverson saw at once, a person who had never been in a hotel. She stood in the doorway for some seconds, looking at the lobby the way another person might have looked at a cathedral. Then she came up to the desk. "Are you Mr. Halverson?" she said. "I am." "I am here," she said, "and I am supposed to tell you that." "You are Miss Pearl?" "Yes." "I have a room for you." "All right." Halverson turned the register around. He produced a pen. He held it out. "You will sign," he said. "Here." She looked at the pen. She looked at the register. She looked at the pen again. "I can't write," she said, in a tone that was neither apology nor defiance but plain factual report, the way another person might have said, "I have never been to Chicago." "An X will do." She made the X. She made it with great care. It was the most carefully made X Halverson had seen in 19 years of hotel keeping. He turned the register back. He wrote her name beside it in his own hand. Pearl. Only that. He had been instructed to do this also. He gave her the key to room 2, which was the smallest room and the one with a window onto the inside courtyard rather than the street, because he had, by then, already decided things about her. "You'll be wanting supper," he said. "I'll be wanting my room." "You'll be wanting supper after that." "Yes," she conceded after a moment, with the air of a person discovering that this too was something hotels did. "I will." They ate, the 4 of them, in the small dining room of the Crescent, at 4 separate tables. They did not, at any point in the meal, speak to one another. They did, however, look. It is not possible for 4 strangers to share a single room of any size for the better part of an hour without forming, by the end of it, an opinion of one another. And the 4 of them, Mrs. Doss, who had run a boarding house for 20 years and could read a room the way another woman read a letter. Father Brell, who had spent 19 years not being recognized and had grown very good at the geometry of it. Mr. Quinn, who made his living by knowing who at a table was watching whom. And Pearl, who had never been in a room with this many people before and was watching everyone with the undisguised attention of a child at a fair, formed theirs. The opinions were various and largely incorrect. Mrs. Doss thought Father Brell was probably not a Catholic and very likely not from Vicksburg. She was correct on the first count and incorrect on the second. Father Brell thought Mr. Quinn was a man on the run from at least 1 and possibly 2 other men. He was correct on both counts. Mr. Quinn thought Mrs. Doss was a widow of some private and undisclosed grievance, and that Pearl was probably her granddaughter. He was correct on the first count, and incorrect on the second in a way he would, by the following evening, come to find very funny. Pearl, for her part, looked at Mrs. Doss for a long time, over a bowl of beef stew that she had been told, with some pride, was the house specialty, and could not decide whether the woman across the room reminded her of someone she had seen in a photograph that morning, or whether she was making it up to have something to think about, the way she sometimes did. She was not making it up. Halverson cleared the dining room at 9. He locked the front door at past. He stood for a moment in the dark lobby with the keys in his hand and felt, settling on his shoulders, an omen. He was not, by temperament, a man given to omens. He had not been raised to them. The Lutherans, in his experience, had not been an omen-friendly people. But he had stood behind this desk for 19 years, and he could feel, in the particular way the building was holding the four of them. Mrs. Doss in room 4, Father Brell in room 6, Mr. Quinn in room 9, Pearl in room 2, that tomorrow was going to be a day. He poured himself a drink. He drank it. He poured himself another. Then he went up the back stairs to his own room, which was the smallest of all of them, and which he had chosen, 19 years earlier, because it was the only one in the building from which a man could hear every door in the hotel open in the night. He lay down on top of the covers in his clothes. He did not, for some hours, sleep. 2. The executor, J. Pettifer, Esquire, was not, strictly speaking, an esquire. He was not, strictly speaking, a lawyer. He had, in 1872, read a book about being a lawyer, and had been, in the 17 years since, mistaken for one with such regularity that he had stopped correcting people. He had been Elias Coombs' friend for 30 years. He had been Elias Coombs' only friend for the last 12. He sat in the back room of the Crescent at 9 o'clock on the morning of the 15th and arranged on the table, in front of him, 4 objects: a sealed envelope, a small brass key, a folded map of the territory south of Sundermill, on which a single mark had been made in red wax, a letter on Elias Coombs' letterhead dated 3 weeks before his death, in which Elias Coombs had explained in 7 careful pages what he wanted Pettifer to do. Pettifer had read the letter 41 times. He still did not understand it. He understood only that Elias had asked him to do it, and that he had said yes, and that saying yes to Elias Coombs was the foundational fact of his adult life, and that he was not going to revisit it now. He looked at the door. He called for the 4 of them. They came in one at a time and sat down in 4 chairs that had been arranged in a half circle. They did not, at first, look at one another. Then they did. Then they looked at Pettifer. "You are all," Pettifer said, "named in the will of Elias Coombs." He paused, to let this land in 4 different ways in 4 different sets of ears. "The letters that brought you here," he said, "were sent by me, at his instruction, 2 weeks after his death. They were sent on the same day to 4 different parts of the country, which I am told was, given the United States Post Office, a small logistical miracle. I will not bore you with how it was achieved. I will say only that it was important to him that you receive them simultaneously, and important to him that I be the one to do it, and important to him, lastly, that you not know about one another until this morning." He waited. Mr. Coombs died on the 2nd of August. He left an estate of significant value. He left it to one of you. To which one of you, he did not specify. Wilhelmina set her teacup down so carefully it made no sound. "I beg your pardon," said Father Brell. "He left," Pettifer said, "instructions." He picked up the envelope. "In this envelope is a series of instructions which I am required, by Mr. Coombs' will, to read aloud. The instructions will guide the 4 of you to a location south of town. At that location, you will find the estate. You will also find, Mr. Coombs assured me, a means by which the 4 of you can determine, among yourselves, which of you is the rightful heir." "A means," said Ambrose. "A means. What kind of means?" "He did not say." "He said," Pettifer said, with the air of a man who had, in private, taken this up with the deceased on numerous occasions in his own head. And I quote, "They will know it when they see it." There was a silence. Pearl, who was 17, and to whom this was now the most interesting morning of her life, put up her hand. "Yes," said Pettifer. Miss Pearl. Is one of us his daughter?" Pettifer hesitated. One of you, he said carefully. Maybe. Maybe, said Wilhelmina, who had not spoken in some minutes, and who said the words flat. Mr. Coombe was a complicated man, Pettifer said, and I am not at liberty. Mr. Coombe, Wilhelmina said, was my husband. Father Brell looked at her. Ambrose looked at her. Pearl looked at her with a steady, unblinking interest that suggested she had been preparing to look at someone exactly like her for most of her short life. He was my husband from 1872 to 1881, Wilhelmina said, in which year I was informed of his death, in this very territory, by a man who is now standing in front of me wearing the same brown coat. Pettifer adjusted the coat. That is not, he said, strictly accurate. Which part? The coat is not the same coat. It is a different coat. I have several. Wilhelmina looked at him. I will continue, Pettifer said, with the reading of the instructions. 3. The ride. The instructions sent them 11 miles south of Sundermill, into a stretch of country that the territorial maps called the Marrow, and the locals called nothing at all, because they did not go there. They went on horseback. Pearl, who had never ridden a horse, was put on the gentlest mare in the Crescent's livery, a creature named Modesty, who had been gentle for 16 years and was not about to start being interesting now. Wilhelmina rode astride in the divided skirt she had made herself for exactly this kind of occasion, which she had been waiting for, in some form, for 8 years. Father Brell rode a black gelding and managed it well, in a way that suggested he had not always been a priest. Ambrose rode a piebald mare and managed it badly, in a way that suggested he had never not been a card cheat. Pettifer rode in front. He carried the map, the brass key, and a canteen. He did not carry a gun, on principle. The principle was that he was a terrible shot. They rode for 3 hours. The sun was a flat white disk. The land was the color of an old penny. Nobody spoke for the first hour. In the second hour, Father Brell drew his horse up alongside Wilhelmina's. Mrs. Doss, Father, you did not know he was alive. I did not. And now I know he is dead. Twice. Father Brell considered this. My condolences, he said, on the second occasion. Thank you, Father. They rode for a moment. Father, Wilhelmina said, Mrs. Doss, when did you know Mr. Coombe? Briefly, in 1876. Under what circumstances? Father Brell looked at the horizon. Mrs. Doss, he said, I am no longer the man I was in 1876. That, said Wilhelmina, was not an answer. No, said Father Brell, it was not. In the third hour, Ambrose pulled his horse up alongside Pearl's. Pearl was holding the saddle horn with both hands and had the rigid, vibrating dignity of a person who had decided, very recently, to die well rather than badly. You're doing fine, Ambrose said. I am not. You are. Modesty's a saint. She wouldn't let you fall off if you tried. I have tried. How? By leaning. Don't lean. I have stopped leaning. Good girl. Pearl, after a moment, said, Did you know him? Once, in a card game, outside Tucson. Did you cheat him? Ambrose looked at her. Yes, he said. Did he know? Yes. Did he stop you? No. Why not? Ambrose, who had been trying to answer this question for 11 years, opened his mouth. He closed it. That, he said, is the question. 4. The marker. They arrived at the place a little after 1 in the afternoon. It was nothing. It was a flat stretch of scrub with a single thing on it, a low stone marker about the size of a butter churn, with no inscription on any of its 4 sides. Beside the marker, driven into the ground, was an iron rod. Beside the rod was a shovel. Pettifer dismounted. He produced the brass key. The key did not fit anything visible. He stood for a moment with the key in his hand. He looked at the marker. He looked at the rod. He looked at the shovel. He did say, Pettifer said, to bring a strong back. You did not say to bring a strong back, Ambrose pointed out. I have one, Pettifer said. Mine. He took off his coat. He picked up the shovel. He began to dig. He dug for 40 minutes. The other four sat in what shade the marker threw, which was none, and watched. At 41 minutes, the shovel struck wood. Pettifer cleared the wood. It was the lid of a small chest, perhaps 2 feet by 1. He pried it free of the dirt. He lifted it out. He set it on the ground beside the marker. He produced the key. The key fit. He turned it. He opened the chest. Inside the chest were 4 objects: a folded square of paper, a small leather pouch, a second daguerreotype in a wooden frame of a man with a beard and a different woman in a different dress, with no child, and a single playing card face down, with something written on the back of it in pencil. Pettifer lifted the paper first. He unfolded it. He read it. He read it again. Then he sat down, abruptly, on the dirt, with the paper in his hand, and laughed, a single, dry, surprised laugh, like a man who has just understood the punchline of a joke told to him a great many years ago by someone he has not stopped missing. Well, he said. Well, Mr. Pettifer, said Wilhelmina. Pettifer held up the paper. The estate, he said, is $14,000 in a bank in San Francisco. Mr. Coombs' instructions, as recorded in this document, are as follows. He cleared his throat. To whichever of these 4 people manages, by the end of this day, to tell me the truth about themselves out loud and in front of the others, I leave the entire sum. If more than one tells the truth, they split it. If none of them tells the truth, the money goes to the Sundermill schoolhouse, the school teacher of which has earned it. A silence. That's it, said Ambrose. That's it, said Pettifer. That's the whole will. He buried $14,000 worth of test. He did not bury the money, Pettifer said. The money is in San Francisco. He buried the terms. He buried the terms. He was, Pettifer said, as I mentioned, a complicated man. Pearl, who had been very quiet, said, What's on the card? Pettifer picked up the playing card. He turned it over. On the face, it was the Queen of Hearts. On the back, in pencil, in a careful hand, were 3 words. She already knows. Pettifer looked up. He looked at the 4 of them, one by one. He stopped and held on Wilhelmina. Wilhelmina did not look surprised. Wilhelmina, in fact, looked like a woman who had been carrying a small, heavy object in her coat pocket for 11 miles, and was, at last, allowed to set it down. 5. The truth. I will go first, said Wilhelmina, because I am the only one of us who is not, at this moment, lying. She stood up. She brushed the dust off her skirt. My name is Wilhelmina Doss. I was married to Elias Coombe from 1872 to 1881. In 1881, I came home from market and found a letter on the kitchen table informing me that he had died of fever in Arizona, signed by a Mr. J. Pettifer. The letter was accompanied by a bank draft for $200 and a note in Elias's own hand which read, Bina, I am sorry. I cannot explain. The money is yours. Do not look for me. She paused. I did not look for him. She paused again and put a hand to her coat pocket and then took it away. I did, however, keep his revolver. I kept it in a locked trunk in the attic of my boarding house for 8 years. I took it out the day your letter came, Mr. Pettifer, and I have been carrying it on my person ever since. And I would like, for the record, to inform the company that I have decided in the last hour not to need it. I will leave it at the hotel before I go. She looked at Pearl. I did not know about you. I want that on the record. I did not know. If I had known, I would have come for you, because Elias was an idiot and a coward and a man who could not stay in one place to save his life, and you would not have had to grow up in a sod house with a woman who is not your mother, however kind she may have been. And do not contradict me, child, because I will be your aunt now, whether you like it or not. Pearl, who had been about to say something, did not say it. "That," said Wilhelmina, "is the truth about me. I will sit down now." She sat down. Father Brell stood up. He did not, at first, speak. He removed the small wooden crucifix from around his neck. He held it in his hand. He looked at it. "My name," he said, "is not Cassian Brell. The name I was born with, I have not spoken in 19 years, and I will not speak today. The name I used in 1876, when I met Elias Coombe, was Henry Vance. Under that name, I robbed a bank in Prescott with 3 other men. Elias Coombe was not one of those men. Elias Coombe was the man who, 4 days later, in a hotel room in Yuma, sat across from me and did not turn me in." He turned the crucifix over in his hand. "He told me," Father Brell said, "to go and be a different man. He said it was harder than it sounded. He said most men who tried it did not commit. He said if I committed, he would never speak of me again." He looked up. "He never spoke of me again." He held up the crucifix. "I have committed. Imperfectly. But I have committed. I have been a priest for 6 years and a Catholic for 9. The knife in my valise, and yes, Mr. Quinn, there is one. You have been wondering since last night. I will throw in the first river I cross on the way home, because I do not need it. I have not needed it for some years. I carried it because I was afraid this was a trap. It was not a trap. It was a gift." He sat down. Ambrose stood up. He put his hands in his pockets. He took them out. He put them back in. "My name is Ambrose Quinn," he said. "That part is true. I cheated Elias Coombe at cards in 1878. He let me. I have wondered for 11 years why he let me. I think I now know why he let me, and I do not like the answer. But I will say it out loud, because apparently that is what we are doing." He took a breath. "He let me because he could see I was bad at it. He could see I was going to get killed, sooner or later, by somebody who was better at cards than I was. And he wanted me to win one, once, in my life, against a man who knew I was cheating and did not mind. He wanted me to know what that felt like, so that, maybe, when somebody came along who was not going to let me cheat them, I would remember the feeling, and I would fold." He looked down at his boots. "There is a man named Otis Hark," he said. "He is in Denver. He has been looking for me for 2 years, and he is, I would estimate, 4 to 6 weeks behind me at the present time. When he finds me, and he will find me, I am going to fold. I do not know what that looks like yet. I think it probably looks like sitting down at a table and not getting up. I have been practicing on the train down here for what to say." He looked up. "That," he said, "is the truth about me. I would like, for the record, to note that I do not want the money. Give it to the schoolhouse. The schoolteacher sounds like she has been through enough." He sat down. Pearl did not stand up. She sat where she was, in the dust, with her hands in her lap. "I don't know," she said, "what the truth about me is." A silence. "I am 17, she said. "I have not done anything. I have not been anywhere. I cannot read. The woman who raised me told me yesterday morning that the man in the picture is supposed to be my father, but I have never met him, and the only thing I know about him is that he was the kind of man who would bury $14,000 under a stone instead of leaving it in a will like a normal person." She looked up. "I do not know if that is the truth about me, because it is mostly the truth about him. But it is the only truth I have got. So I am saying it." A longer silence. Wilhelmina, very quietly, said, "That'll do, child." 6. The ride back. Pettifer counted, in his head, 4 truths. He put the playing card in his breast pocket. He put the daguerreotype back in the chest. He put the leather pouch in his saddlebag because, he said, it contained train fare for all of them, and he was going to distribute it personally. They rode back to Sundermill in the long red slant of late afternoon. Halfway back, Father Brell pulled his horse up alongside Pettifer's. Mr. Pettifer. Father. When did he write the will? 3 weeks before he died. Did he know he was dying? Pettifer was quiet for a long moment. Father, he said, Elias Coombe knew he was dying from the day I met him in 1859. He just got better and better at it. Father Brell considered this. That is, he said, a remarkable epitaph. It is the one he asked for. In Sundermill, at the Crescent, Halverson watched the 5 of them ride back in at sunset and counted in his head 5 horses and 5 riders, and felt, again, an omen settle. This one different from the mornings, lighter, the way the air is lighter after a storm has passed and not after it has arrived. He poured them 5 drinks. He did not ask which they wanted. They drank what he gave them. Wilhelmina that night signed Pearl's name in the register with her own hand, properly this time. Pearl Doss. Pearl watched her do it. Pearl did not object. Pearl did, however, ask before bed whether she could learn to read. In the morning, Wilhelmina said. In the morning, Pearl agreed. Coda. A note from the records of the Sundermill schoolhouse. Recovered from the Territorial Archive, Phoenix, 1934. Pencil on lined paper, in the hand of Miss Hortensia Beale, schoolteacher, who had at that point been barricaded inside the one-room schoolhouse of Sundermill, Arizona Territory for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. The 15th of September. Mr. Pettifer came to the window today. He had 2 children with him, neither of whom were students of mine, because I have no students, because I am, as previously documented in these pages, on principle, alone. He said he had a sum of money for the schoolhouse. I asked him how much. He said $14,000. I asked him to repeat himself. He repeated himself. I asked him whether he was drunk. He said he was not, but that he might shortly be, and that I was welcome to join him if I wished to come out. I did not come out. I did, however, accept the money, which he passed to me through the window in the form of a banker's draft, along with a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts, on the back of which had been written, in pencil, "She already knows." I have looked at this card for some hours now. I do not know what I know. I suspect, however, that this is the point. I have decided, accordingly, that tomorrow I will unlock the door of the schoolhouse, for the first time since the 18th of May in the year of our Lord 1887, and I will go into the street, and I will find Mr. Pettifer at whatever saloon he is in, and I will buy him a drink, and I will ask him about the man whose money this was, because anyone capable of getting $14,000 into the hands of a woman who has spent 2 years refusing to take anything from anyone is a man I should like, retrospectively, to have known. I have written, at the top of this page, the date. I will write, at the bottom, the only other thing I can think to write. He already knew. H. Beale, schoolteacher, Sundermill, Arizona Territory, the 15th of September, 1889.
Once upon a tall tale.
The White Hat with the Gold Butterfly by Morgan Olson. Once Upon a Tall Tale Season 0, Episode 6. There was a stretch of years out west when folks got more afraid of signs than of sins. A sin required doing. A man had to steal, lie, or draw iron first. A sign was easier. A sign could sit quietly on a porch rail or hang from a man's shoulders without him knowing it. Signs didn't wait for proof. They just waited for people to start believing. That was about the time Sen began riding through the country. He never arrived in a hurry. Men in a hurry stirred dust and trouble both. Sen rode steady on a pale horse with a dark mane and patient eyes. carrying a leather satchel full of slim pamphlets tied with string. The horse moved like something that had learned, over a long time, that the road always continued. He wore a white hat so clean it looked less like clothing than an opinion. The hat was the first thing people noticed. The second was his stillness. Most men fidgeted. With a brim, with a coin, with the collar of a coat that never quite fit right. Sen did not fidget. He gave the impression of a man who had already decided everything worth deciding and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. By afternoon in any town he visited, little stacks of pamphlets would appear. On the counter at the general store, beside hymnals in the church vestibule, tucked into the corner shelf at the schoolhouse. Nobody saw him place them. They were simply there, the way shadows are at noon, or the smell of rain before it arrives. They all bore the same title, Dangerous Times, How Good Towns Stay Good. Jed Mercer was the first to notice them in his store. He picked one up with 2 fingers like it might be contagious. Amos Pike leaned over the counter to look. Dangerous Times, Jed said. You seen this before? Amos squinted. Looks like church reading. Jed snorted. Ain't church reading if it's stacked next to tobacco. He flipped through the pages slowly. The paper was cheap, but the printing was neat. Small stories filled the booklet. Little cautionary tales about towns that hesitated when they should have acted. Towns that trusted too easily. A widow who let a stranger sleep in the barn 3 nights running and found her silver missing on the 4th morning. Amos tapped the page. What's it say? Jed shrugged. Mostly says a good town stays alert. Alert to what? Jed frowned. That part keeps changing. That was when the door creaked open and Sen stepped inside. He removed his gloves slowly, like a man who expected to stay a while. His smile was polite without being eager. He had the kind of face that was hard to argue with. Not because it threatened anything, but because it seemed to have already considered your objection and found it reasonable, but insufficient. Jed held up the pamphlet. You selling these? No, sir, Sen said. Giving them away? Sen leaned against the counter with the calm of a man who never feared being misunderstood. Folks tend to pay anyway. Amos scratched his chin. What are they supposed to fix? Nothing's broken yet. Amos chuckled. Then why warn people? Sen's eyes moved easily between the 2 men. Because warnings work better before anyone's angry. It was the kind of answer that made disagreement feel unnecessary. By the end of the week, most of the town had read the pamphlet. It never shouted its warnings. It spoke the way a careful neighbor might. Gently, with regret already built in, as though the telling of the thing was itself a small sadness the teller wished he could spare you. No names were ever used. No towns were marked on a map. Every story happened in a place described only as a town much like yours, which meant everyone imagined it was. But the most curious thing about the pamphlet wasn't the stories. It was the back page. There, beneath the final moral lesson, appeared a small advertisement framed in tidy ink. Send away your old hat. Receive a modern American cowboy hat in the newest respectable style. Below it sat a drawing of 3 hats in profile. Wide-brimmed, clean, nearly identical. In small lettering beneath, new beginnings start with what you wear. And an address, a post office box in a city 3 days east by rail. Young Eli Turner read that part 3 times before speaking. Why would anyone do that? He asked. Jed glanced up from his ledger. Do what? Send away an old hat. Eli touched the brim on his own head. It was dark felt, with a stitched band his grandfather had carried across an ocean nobody in town could pronounce. My granddad wore this one, Eli said. Jed shrugged. New hats fit better. My granddad's fit fine. Jed nodded toward the window. Outside, Sen stood near the hitching rail talking with 2 women as though he had known them since childhood. He was laughing softly at something one of them had said. The loose, easy laugh of a man with nothing to hide. Then maybe your granddad had reasons, Jed said. Eli watched the stranger laugh again. You think that fellow's got reasons too? Jed closed his ledger. Son, he said, a man who rides that calm always has reasons. The change didn't arrive like a storm. Storms announced themselves. This was more like a shift in weather people didn't notice until they had already started dressing differently. Boys in the schoolyard began teasing each other. Black hat, one shouted. White hat, another answered. At first it was a joke, but jokes are where new rules enter. Through laughter, which is the least guarded door. Soon, men in the saloon started mentioning hats the way they used to mention the wind. As something that simply existed, that bore no arguing with. He seems decent enough for a black hat sort. That fellow's got a white hat look about him. No one quite agreed what those words meant. Some said it was about the darkness of the felt. Some said it was about where a man came from. Some said it was about what a man's father had done, as though character were a thing that dried into the leather and could not be cleaned out. No one agreed, and it didn't matter. They had begun to feel the words, and feeling was enough to go on. Miss Larkin, the school teacher, was the first to speak to Sen plainly. She found him on the schoolhouse porch, placing another bundle of pamphlets on the bench. Eli Turner was sweeping the step nearby and stopped when he heard her voice. You ever worry? She said. People will start judging each other too quickly? Sen looked up with a polite smile. They already do. You're encouraging it. No, ma'am. He straightened the stack so the edges lined up. I'm giving them a language for what they already feel. That sounds like power. Only if people keep speaking it. Miss Larkin folded her arms. She had been teaching long enough to recognize the difference between a man being evasive and a man being careful. Sen was careful. Every word placed just so, like stones across a creek. Inviting you to cross without quite admitting he'd built the path. And if they do? She asked. Sen's eyes drifted toward the road where travelers passed beneath hats of every shape imaginable. Then they'll know how to protect what's good. It was a handsome answer. That was part of the danger. Miss Larkin stood there another moment. Then she picked up one of the pamphlets, walked inside, and tacked it to the board at the front of her classroom with a single pin. Not as a lesson, but as a warning, the way you'd tack up a picture of a poisonous plant. By the next morning it had been taken down. Nobody said by whom. Eli had watched all of it from the step. He'd heard Miss Larkin name the thing exactly. He went home that evening and said nothing to anyone, which was its own kind of answer. The first real trouble arrived through a man named Mateo Ruiz. Mateo worked cattle north of town. He spoke little and kept his hat pulled low when the wind picked up. He had worked that land for 11 years, fixing fences others left broken, clearing drainage ditches that froze and thawed and froze again. His name came up in conversation only in a certain tone. Careful, abbreviated, the tone used for things people had decided not to examine too closely. His hat was black felt, old but carefully mended. There was fine stitching along the band. Red and gold thread, a pattern his mother had learned from her mother, who had learned it in a country whose name the town couldn't place on any map they owned. One afternoon, Eli Turner sat down beside him outside the store. "Why don't you trade that hat in?" Eli asked. Mateo looked at him slowly. "My father wore this hat. They'll send you a new one." Mateo ran a thumb along the stitched band. "My father's hand stitched that." Eli shrugged. He was not a cruel boy. He was simply a boy who had read a pamphlet, heard a school teacher say the word power to a stranger's face, and gone home without saying a word. People say the old ones carry the wrong kind of history. Mateo's voice stayed calm. History is history. But later that week, Mateo noticed fewer men inviting him to sit at their table. A chair that had always been available was suddenly claimed. A conversation that paused when he walked past did not resume until he had moved on. The following Sunday, he found someone had scrawled "black hat" on the stable door where he kept his horse. Nobody admitted writing it. Nobody said they approved of it either. They just said times were getting dangerous. What the town did not know was that many old hats carried more than sweat and weather. That Sunday night, after he had scrubbed the chalk from the stable door until the wood showed pale beneath it, Matteo sat alone with his father's hat in his lap. He had meant only to clean it. He worked his thumb along the band the way his father used to, following the red and gold thread without thinking, the way a man finds a familiar door in the dark. The room changed. Not a picture so much as a presence. Heat coming off a stone wall, wood smoke, the green smell of crushed herbs, and a woman's hands moving a needle through felt by lamplight. She was humming something with no words he had ever known, only the shape of them. His mother. The pattern under his thumb was the pattern she was sewing, and for as long as his thumb kept moving, she was there, alive, bent over the work in a village whose name he had never once heard spoken in this country. When he lifted his thumb, the village went out like a blown lamp. He sat in the dark a while. Then he set the hat on the peg by the door where his father had kept it, and his father's father before him. He was not the only one carrying such a thing, and he understood that now, without being told. Other men had folded their own freight into the felt. Prayers tucked into sweatbands, a brim bent to the line of a hill no one here would ever climb again. A wife's initials pressed above the sweat line by a man who had spent 3 years unable to speak. The letters left there like a ghost long after the hat was sold and resold twice over. A hat could outlast a language. It could keep a village breathing long after its owner had forgotten how to say its name. Matteo understood why a man might keep such a thing. What he did not yet understand was that the town had already decided keeping it was the crime. By autumn, boxes of old hats began leaving town wrapped in brown paper and twine. They traveled 3 days east by rail to a city where a warehouse stood unmarked on the edge of an industrial block. What happened inside that warehouse, nobody in town thought to ask. The hats arrived. The new ones came back. That was the whole of the transaction, as far as anyone was concerned. Men called it modernization. Women called it tidying up. The minister mentioned briefly that there was something wholesome about a fresh start. A young widow sent away the hat her husband had been wearing the day he died, and for a few weeks afterward she felt lighter and less haunted and grateful for it. That was the cleverest part of the whole arrangement. It worked. It did exactly what it promised, on exactly the wound it promised to heal. The cost came later, and quietly, and never once arrived with a name attached. The new hats arrived in plain boxes, clean white felt, each nearly identical to the next. They kept the sun off. They had no stories in them. Matteo Ruiz was the last man in town who kept his. By spring, he found fewer cattle offered to his care. One evening, he walked into the saloon and discovered the room had grown quiet in the specific way rooms do when someone enters who is no longer expected. Someone muttered the word black hat. It came from the back of the room, where the light was lowest. Matteo finished his drink without hurrying. He set the glass down gently, the way a man does when he knows he is being watched and refuses to give the watching anything to feed on. He left town the next morning. No one stopped him. They told themselves it was safer this way. Some believed it. Some just needed to say it until they did. Eli Turner watched Matteo ride out from the window of the general store. He stood there long enough that Jed asked him twice if he needed something. He was thinking about his grandfather's hat on the shelf above his bed. Dark felt, the band stitched in a country nobody here could name. He was thinking that it was the same kind of hat, that the same word had waited on the stable door for Matteo, and that a word like that, once it was loose, went looking for the next dark brim it could land on. He was 16. He wanted to sit at the tables that were filling up. He wanted to laugh the easy laugh and have it cost him nothing. He did not want to be a man who set his glass down with great care in a quiet room and then rode out alone in the morning while people told one another it was safer this way. He knew, standing there, exactly what he was holding. He had heard Miss Larkin name it to Sen's face. He understood it as well as anyone in town. That was the worst part. He understood it, and he did it anyway. The following week, he wrapped his grandfather's hat in brown paper and addressed it to the post office box 3 days east. He told himself it was just a hat. He told himself that for a long time afterward. That same winter, dreams began thinning. Not nightmares. Those remained. Those always do. Just absences. The widow who had sent her husband's hat away stopped dreaming of her mother's kitchen. The smell of a particular soap, the exact angle of afternoon light through a window that no longer stood. A farmer forgot the path to a river he had only ever seen in sleep. The losses were quiet enough that people mistook them for growing up. Years later, folks argued about whether Sen had ever really existed. Some said he was a salesman. Some said a preacher. Some said he was a government man doing the work that governments prefer not to sign their names to. Some said he was just a man who understood people better than they understood themselves, and that was its own kind of government. The pamphlets survived, yellowed and brittle, in a few attics and trunks. The hats remained, clean, identical, forgettable. The fear kept working, which is what fear does when no one tends it. It becomes the weather. Old Mrs. Weller finally ended the debate the way old women often do. Not with an argument, but with a fact. "You're all forgetting something," she said from her rocker. Jed Mercer looked over. "What's that?" "His hat." "White hat," Jed said. Mrs. Weller shook her head. "Not just white." The room grew quiet. "Little gold butterfly stitched on the side," she said. "Caught the light when he turned." "You sure?" Eli asked. Mrs. Weller nodded once. "Certain." She leaned back in the chair. "That's how I knew he wasn't from around here." No one spoke for a long time. Butterflies only show up when something has already been eaten. The faces on the banners. The Tale of the Dead King Coin. Tall Tales. Season 0, Episode 7. In the kingdom, the king had not been seen in living memory. This was not a crisis. His decrees arrived monthly on heavy parchment, his taxes were collected on schedule, his roads were kept, his soldiers wore his colors. There was every evidence of a king, and after enough time, evidence becomes the thing. But there was something older than the decrees, and far more visible. His face. It was on the banner above the gatehouse of every village of consequence, a crowned figure facing forward, flat and formal, symmetrical. The mouth level, the eyes level, the brow a single unbroken line running temple to temple without a break, as though whoever drew it had laid a ruler across the page and pressed. It was on the coins. Children held the copper up to the light and looked at the little stamped profile, and it looked back without comment. Above the church door in Arnholt, it had been cut into stone at a scale that made the unbroken brow genuinely impressive in its commitment. Rain had softened the edges. Moss had taken one corner. The expression, or rather the precise absence of one, had outlasted all of it. The face was everywhere, and because it was everywhere, it was nowhere. Not a portrait anymore, but a pattern, a texture, the sound of a mill wheel you stop hearing after the first week. Nobody had thought to ask, in living memory, whether it was a likeness of anything. Arnholt sat on a river bend, known for its autumn fare and its strong opinions on the curing of ham. The king's face had been part of the furniture so long that the question of what it actually depicted had simply never come up. There was the mill, the well, the lightning-split oak that had kept growing on both halves, and the banner over the inn, faded to a dusty rose, brow intact. The innkeeper was Greta. At some point, a thing that told you most of what you needed to know about her, she had hung her own sign, a painted goose, directly beside the royal banner, so the two faces regarded each other across the doorway with what looked like mutual suspicion. Her son Piet had taken the king's measure at 7, head tipped back under the banner. "He looks like his face was carved out of a table," he said. "That's how they draw kings," Greta told him. "It's heraldry. It's formal. The goose has an expression." "The goose," she said, "isn't trying to convey authority." In Dov's tavern, someone had carved a small version of the face into the beam over the bar. So long ago, no one alive could account for it, and custom held you tapped it before your first drink. The gesture had come loose from any meaning and become simply a thing you did, like kicking the doorstep before you went inside. "The king's looking well," people said, tapping it. "He always does," came the answer. Everything else moved. Prices, weather, who owed whom, and the face stayed put. That was the joke. The children had a game. You froze your face into the expression and held it while the others tried to break you. Most cracked in seconds. One girl, Marta, could hold it close to a minute, and was regarded with admiration and a little unease. "You look hewn from rock," a boy told her once. "Thank you," said Marta, not breaking. The caravan came on a market Wednesday. A dozen merchants from the capital, or near enough that they carried the impatient accent of people who consider themselves from somewhere that matters. They sold dyed cloth, glazed pots, a little metalwork. Ordinary by every first appearance. Piet, grown now, heavy in the shoulder, was pretending to price a bolt of cloth and talking roads with one of them, a tired man with a short beard and ink in the creases of his fingers. And in the easy way of a man telling a joke he expects to land soft and familiar, Piet glanced up at the banner, looked back, made the face, brow flat, eyes gone to blank copper, and said, "At least the king keeps his prices steady." Dove, passing with a tray, made a small approving sound. The merchant stared. Not the blank half-second of a missed joke, a long stare, one that traveled from Piet's face to the banner to the coin in Piet's hand, to the carved face over the tavern door and back again, and arrived somewhere past confusion. "Why are you making that face?" "It's the king's face," Piet said. "The crest, the way they draw him." "The crest," the merchant repeated, testing the word for soundness. He set down his cloth and looked around the square. The banners, the coins going hand to hand, the carved faces over the doors. Like a man who has arrived somewhere and understood too late that it is not where he meant to be. That is not a style. Those are portraits. The royal painters swear oaths of accuracy. To alter the king's image, even a little, is a hanging matter. A pause. That is exactly how the king looks. The square took this in the way a body takes a step that isn't there. The word went out from the cloth stall in rings. It's a face. It's a real man's face. It's him. And reached the lanes and the well and Dov's open door. And Arnholt stood in the late light holding a fact it had no shelf to set down. There was a man at the edge of the market who had not bought anything. He had come in 2 days before on a tall horse the color of wet ash, and he was not from the capital or from any direction Arnholt had a name for. His skin was the strange part. It was patched, dark and pale at once, mottled across his face and his bare forearms as though the two colors had been poured and never allowed to settle. Like a magpie, like a page written on one half and left blank on the other. The children had decided he was magic on the first afternoon and had not yet been given a reason to revise it. He wore mail gone soft with use and a sword he did not seem to think about, the way other men do not think about their hands. The older people knew him for what he was, or near enough. Fairafis, the oldest stories had it. Though the name had been in the country a long time and the local tongue had worn it down to something like Farafiz, the way a coin wears down to a thumb-smoothed blur. There had always been stories of the knights from the far side of the old wars, the ones who rode with the Cupseekers and the Round Company before the kingdom shut its doors and put one face on everything. Saracen lords, the stories called them. Men out of a country where they did not let you make a face of God, or of anyone, and held it a kind of sin to nail a likeness up and ask the world to bow at it. He had been listening to all of it. Piet's joke, the merchant's stare, the word portraits. Now he laughed, once, low, and it was not a kind laugh. "You poor stamped people," he said. "You've been worshipping a man and calling it wallpaper." The merchant did not care for the tone. It is the law of the realm. The likeness is true, and the likeness is protected. That is the beginning and the end of it. "No," said the knight. "That is the beginning, and it is not new." He looked up at the dusty rose brow the way a physician looks at a rash he has seen carry off whole households. "I have broken this same trick in 4 kingdoms. A king who does not die when his body does, who lives out the lives of many men, and another behind him, and another, the same face on all of them. So the people never learn what a dead king looks like, and never get the dangerous idea that there could be one. It runs the same every time, and every time there is one man behind it who knows how it is done, and every time it is not the king." "And what becomes of your 4 kingdoms?" the merchant asked, meaning it as a sneer. "They get the definitive edition. The story stops repeating." He held the merchant's eye. "Where I was raised, we did not hang a man's face above a door and teach the children to bow to it. We had learned what a face does to people when it is everywhere and never blinks. Breaking it is the only thing I know how to give a country that I would call a kindness." He nodded at the banner. "He has put his one face on 10,000 doors and thinks it has made him 10,000 times a king. He has not done his sums. A likeness that true is not a picture. It is a tether. Whatever happens to the face he was born with happens, that same hour, to every face he has hammered onto your coins and your gates and your God's own house. He made himself impossible to look away from. The pale and the dark of his face shifted against each other. He also made himself impossible to miss." The merchant told him he was mad. He used the word twice, the way men do when they are reaching for a fraid and won't touch it. "You don't believe me," the knight said. "That's all right. Belief was never the part that mattered." He gathered his reins. "I'll give him the same chance I gave the others, and wait the same 3 days for his answer. Watch your money." And he rode east, toward the capital, at the unhurried pace of a man who has all the time in the world, because he intends to make some. It came on an ordinary afternoon, the better part of a week later, long enough that the party-colored knight had passed out of the village's daily talk and back into the older stories where he seemed to belong. There was no warning, and no cause that anyone in Arnholt could see. In Dov's tavern, a man named Holt had just tapped the beam, the king's looking well, and had his cup halfway to his mouth when the carved face above the bar changed. Not all at once. The wood simply darkened in a ring around the left eye, a bruise rising in oak the way it rises in a struck knuckle, swelling, going plumb, going black, the grain bunching as though the beam had been hit by something enormous and very far away. Holt set the cup down without drinking from it. At her window, old Wren stood with the clean coin she had kept for 30 years, and watched the little stamped face take a black eye in copper, the metal puckering dark over the left socket. What rose in her was not the horror she would have guessed, but a strange, swooping vindication, as though something she had half suspected her whole life had finally had the decency to show its hand. In the lane the children were mid-game, and Marta, who could hold the face longer than anyone, had the brow right and the level mouth right, when her own left eye, against everything she could do to stop it, began to water, and then to darken at the corner. She put her hand over it. She kept the hand there a long time, and she never played the game again. On the banner above the inn, the dusty rose face bloomed a bruise. On the church door, in stone, with the moss still patient in its corner, a black eye opened beneath the unbroken brow, as though the rock had been struck by the weight of an entire country. Every coin in every purse, every banner in every village of consequence, the kingdom over, in the same hour of the same afternoon. 10,000 faces, 10,000 black eyes, and those who had stood in the square on market day went cold, because they remembered the patched man and what he had said about the king's 10,000 faces, and understood, all at once and without being told, that somewhere a week to the east he had finally raised his hand. What had happened in the capital came back the way all news from the capital came, slowly, in pieces, carried by later travelers, and never told twice the same. But the shape of it held, because the whole kingdom was wearing the proof of it. The knight had gotten inside, past the painted men and the real ones, into the room where the actual king sat behind his actual face, with the one other man who mattered standing at his shoulder. A stooped, unhurried figure, the stories settled on calling the wizard, for want of his right name. The man who had administered the painter's oaths and known what the oaths were for, who had kept a single face alive across more reigns than anyone had thought to count. He had not drawn his sword. He had walked up to the king and struck him once, open-handed, but with the whole road behind it. And that was the blow Arnholt had felt come down on every coin and beam and lintel in the same afternoon. Then he had stepped back and made his offer, which the travelers agreed was less a threat than a door held open. Take the face down. Let your people learn there can be a last king. Walk out of this room an old man with a black eye and your life, and I will wait 3 days for your answer. The king gave it before the knight had finished speaking. Off with his head, and the knight, it was said, only nodded, as though the king had at last said something true to his character, and let them take him, and kept his word, and waited out the 3 days somewhere the guard could not finish what the king had begun. They came for him in those days. The king's guard poured out of the capital like something tipped from a broken jug. Riders in the king's colors, the king's face stamped on every breastplate, and every one of those faces now wearing the king's fresh black eye. So the whole column rode out looking like an army that had already lost a fight it had not yet reached. They did not find him. You do not find a man like that until he has decided to be found. On the 3rd day, he decided. In Arnholt, it arrived as the first time had, without warning, everywhere at once, except that this was nothing like almost funny, the way a black eye had been almost funny. Holt was in the tavern again and did not reach for the beam. No one had tapped it in 3 days. He only watched the bruised carved face change a second time, the 2 black eyes thinning, narrowing, resolving into crosses. 2 small, neat X's where the level gaze had been. The mark a child scratches over a dead thing in the dirt. On the beam, on the banner, on the church stone with its moss, on every coin in every purse and every banner the kingdom over. All in a single breath, a whole kingdom's worth of one face going out together, like lamps down a long hall. The telling, when it caught up, ran like this, and Arnholt kept it because it sounded like him. He had come back through the painted men and the real ones a second time, and this time he had gone for the stooped man first, the wizard, the actual engine of the thing. Because he had ridden through 4 kingdoms and learned in the very first one which of the 2 men in that room was worth killing. He took the wizard out of the world cleanly and for good, and whatever long enchantment the man had been holding upright, like a tent pole through all those reigns, went slack as he fell. And then, the keeper of the binding dead and the trick left with no one alive to work it, the knight finished the king, who was by then only a man with a black eye, and had been one for 3 days. In Arnholt, the banner above the inn hung with its crossed eyes beside Greta's painted goose, which went on wearing its one ordinary expression, the only face in the doorway with anything left behind the eyes. Greta looked at the 2 of them a long while. Then she took the goose down, because it no longer seemed decent to leave it keeping company with that, and hung it on the far wall, where it could look at the room instead. The knight did not come back through Arnholt. Men like that rarely come back through anywhere. It is most of what makes them men like that. He passed into the same place the cup-seekers had gone, and the round company and all the old strangeness the kingdom had long ago shut its doors against, into stories where he could not be taxed. And the children gave him 6 roads he might have taken, and a song with a chorus, and no 2 verses anyone could agree on. The portraits, in the end, were the easy part. With no king to enforce the law and no painter's oath left binding anything to anything, the banners came down one square at a time, quietly. The way a town takes down decorations after a feast, nobody is sure went well. Within a year, you could walk most of a day and not meet the unbroken brow. The crossed eyes went into attics and onto scrap heaps and under coats of whitewash, and were, slowly and mostly, forgotten. The coins were the trouble. Because the wizard was dead, and the wizard had been the only man who ever knew how the thing was done, there was no one left to ask how it might be undone. And you cannot melt your way out of every purse in a kingdom in a single season. The coins were money, and people are poor, and money spends no matter what its face is doing. So the copper stayed in circulation, hand to hand, year after year, the dead king looking out of every piece of it with two small crossed eyes, buying bread and paying rent and settling debts over ham. A sovereign reduced, at the last, to exactly the thing he had always insisted he was. A face on something that changes hands and does not look back. They called it the dead king coin. For a long time it was reckoned unlucky to be handed one in your change. Then it was merely common, and then it was only money. The way the face had once been only wallpaper. They had spent generations not seeing the face at all. Now they carried it in their pockets, cross-eyed and spending, and could not be rid of it however they tried. The Magpie Night, the song the children of Arnholt made, of which the chorus was the only part they could agree on. Who rode from the morning lands, who blacked the eye of the deathless king, with the weight of the road in his hands. For the coin goes out, and the coin comes home, and you cannot spend it away. The dead king looks from 1,000 X's, and he looks at you today. In a single season's fire, so the dead king rides in the poor man's purse, and never once retires. He buys the bread, he pays the rent, he passes hand to hand. A face on a thing that changes hands, and never looks back at the land. The knight rode off by one of 6 roads, or 6, for none could say, into the tales where the cup was sought, where the tacksman cannot stay. We never were told his proper name. The old wives called him this, the morning knight, the magpie knight, the two-faced Feraphis. So the coin goes out and the coin comes home, and you cannot spend it away. The dead king looks from 1,000 crosses. So meet his eye today.
This episode is very sound heavy. Headphones are encouraged.
The White Road. The White Road to Tuva by Morgan Olson. Once Upon a Tall Tale. Season 0. Episode 8. The bombs fell in winter, and in that alone lay their mercy, for winter was a thing the far north already knew how to survive. The Kremlin fell as great hollow buildings fall, loud, theatrical, and in the end beside the point. What came after was not chaos. Chaos would have meant that someone was surprised. This was quieter than that. Systems that had spent decades merely pretending to exist simply ceased, the way a man stops pretending he is not tired and sits down in the snow. What remained was a thin and meager world, pockets of warmth, pockets of memory, and a great many roads that no longer agreed among themselves on where they went. The Finn lived far enough north that the end of the world reached him politely. The radio hissed to static and stayed there. The supply truck did not come, and did not come again, and after the third week he stopped walking out to the road to look. The reindeer still wanted moving. That much the apocalypse had not touched. He had never asked much of the world, and had spent 30 years arranging his life so the world would agree to the arrangement. By his own reckoning, he had done well enough. Then the Russian came up the valley with papers. Poor papers, unconvincing papers. Papers that had once meant something, which is occasionally enough. He was careful in the way of men who have spent their lives in rooms where the wrong sentence carried consequences. He stood so, even now, not stiffly, but measured, weighing each word before he let it go free. There is a place, he said, east, past where the maps still agree among themselves on anything. He spoke the name the way one passes from hand to hand a thing one is not certain one has the right to give away. Tuva. The Finn looked up from the herd for the first time. That is not a city. No, it is older than cities. The papers, it transpired, were only the cover of the thing, a dead government's seal upon a dead government's form, sufficient that whatever tired men still stood at whatever remained of the checkpoints would wave it through. He set them aside, almost apologetically. The true article he had kept against his chest and brought out last. It was old, folded so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth, and worn thin at the edges where 100 years of hands had turned it over. He opened it as one opens a thing for which there can be no replacement. 2 columns of writing ran the length of the page, one in Russian, the other in a tongue the Russian himself could not read. The same words twice, set down by 2 different dead men's hands. The Finn read his half before he had decided to. He had not known he still could. His grandmother had owned a handful of words for the East which she had never explained and had never been permitted to speak aloud, and here they were upon this page, in a stranger's keeping. Where did you come by this? It was my great-great-grandfather's, Artur Edvard. The Russian said the name carefully, as one handles a thing that belongs to more people than oneself. He wrote it for whoever remained in the north when the family came apart. That is you, I think. What is left of you. He let the Finn hold it. He says there is ground in the east that is ours still. Taiga above the rivers, where the dear summer, Our cousins hold it. He says they will go on holding it after him. That was a long time ago. Yes. They may all be dead by now. Yes. The Russian did not look away from the page. He makes no promise that it is safe. He says it is hard country and that he will not lie to me about that. He says it will hold us. That is his very word. Not protect. Hold. The Finn looked long at the page. Near the bottom, in both hands at once, the same line ran twice. The road is long, and the road is white, and it alone leads home. How far? He said. I do not know. The road will decide. The matter was simple, in the way that only impossible things are simple once spoken aloud. Drive the herd east, keep them breathing, bring them to ground that still remembered what reindeer were for. The name mattered less than the direction, the one thing the Russian said that the Finn believed entirely. The Finn said no, politely, properly, as one says no when the world has ended and refusal is the last lever a hand still has hold of. The Russian did not argue. He threatened nothing and promised nothing so foolish as safety. He folded the letter back along its soft creases, held it out, and left the cold, and the herd, and the thing written in two hands to do the work that argument could not. In the end, it was neither the man who decided it nor the herd, though the deer had been uneasy for days, and he had been calling it nothing. It was the handwriting that decided. A dead man, 4 generations gone, had set down the same words twice so that neither half of his family should lose the way home. And such a thing is either nothing whatsoever, or it is the only thing left that means anything at all, and the Finn found he could not make himself believe it nothing. He chose the other belief. One takes what the road gives and calls it a gift, because to call it nothing is how a man goes under. They left before he could think better of it. The Finn took one last look at the land against which he had built his whole life, and said softly, to no one, but heard by the crows. The word went out over the snow and did not return. The reindeer were already moving. The first days were honest ones, a cold that pretended to be nothing but cold. They made good time. The Russian kept pace and did not complain, which the Finn marked and did not remark upon. On the 4th night, the vodka gave out, and the Russian produced a second bottle from his pack. You had 2. I am an optimist. They drank by a fire too small to do much good, and warmer for being small. The Russian poured without asking, which was right. The Finn drank without thanking him, which was right also. You knew, the Finn said, before you came to me, how bad it was. The Russian watched the fire a while. Bad enough to come to you. The bombs. All of it. Most of it. The Finn drank. You ought to have told me. You would have said no. I said no regardless. And then you said yes. The Russian shrugged. So. The Finn very nearly smiled. It was not a warm thing, but it was a true one, but heard by the crows. Yes, the Russian agreed. Exactly that. They finished the bottle and spoke no further of the end of the world. The cold was already saying all there was to say of it. The road never announced itself. It was simply what remained when the other paths had given up. Packed snow, old migration lines, a seam in the country running thinner than the land to either side. They walked, and the days lost their edges. Time ceased to be a number and became weather. The Russian had been a man of tallies, distances, rations, the days behind and the days ahead. At first he kept count from habit, the way a tongue returns to a tooth already gone. Somewhere in the second week, he found he had lost the thread of his counting and did not mind the loss. He let it go. They passed through towns where no one raised a hand to them, and fires still warmed beside which no one sat. Once they came upon a road sign, the name upon it scratched away, a second name set below it in charcoal. That one scratched away in turn, and beneath it only an arrow pointing both directions at once, as though the land itself no longer knew what to call itself. It was not all omen. A lashing on the sledge rotted through, and the Russians spent a whole morning splicing it with fingers too cold to bend, swearing in a tongue the Finn did not own but understood entirely. 4 days running they ate the same boiled grain, until the Finn could no longer taste it, and the Russian could taste nothing else. A river with no business being open was open, and they lost half a day walking upstream to a narrow place, and the Russian went into the knee crossing it, and they made an early camp to dry his boot over a fire that would not catch. No one said anything wise about any of it. It was bad, and then it was past, and they went on. The Russian spoke less, the further they went. He had been a man who filled silence as his trade, gathered it, sorted it, laid it by where it might serve later. Now there was no one left to file it for, and in time the silence ceased to feel like an absence, and began to feel like a room. At an abandoned homestead, the Finn came in and found him at the writing desk, going through the drawers, quick, practiced, with hands that knew exactly how a drawer gives up what is taped beneath it. The Russian stopped when he marked he was watched. He looked at his own hands as though they belonged to a man he once had known. "Habit," he said. "Find anything?" "No, there is never anything there. There never was." He pushed the drawer to. That was always the joke of it. Storms came at them sideways, a reindeer went lame, and they carried it in turns, and did not discuss the arrangement, for there was nothing in it to discuss. The Russian's hands blistered and healed and blistered again. He never spoke of it. The Finn saw and held his own tongue too. He saw the boots as well. The Russian slept in them, every night, laced, like a man who expected to be roused and made to answer for himself. In all those weeks the Finn never once saw his bare feet. He took it for a soldier's habit and let it be, as he let most things be. The land had begun to change by then, though neither spoke of it for a long while, as one does not name a fever until certain of it. Color crept into the snow at the day's edges. The wind took up a note it had not carried before. Not warmer, precisely, but purposeful. And then the flags. Scraps of cloth knotted to branches and to poles along the ridgelines. Blue, white, red, green, and gold. Frayed soft, old enough to belong to the place. Not warnings, not boundaries, only color, speaking to something that had no need of a roof. The Finn stopped and looked at them a long while. "You know what those are," the Russian said. "I know what they are for." He could not have told how he knew it. It rose in him like a word in a tongue he had never been taught, and owned nonetheless. Speaking to something that does not keep itself inside a building. The Russian thought of buildings, and of what had been kept inside them, and what the keeping had cost. That sounds about right. That night the road forked, and the Russian dreamed. It came upon him in numbers first, as it always did. Coordinates, yields, the dead arithmetic he had carried 30 years. Then the numbers fell away like ash, and beneath them was a circus. A grand one, of the kind the old state had once built to prove that grace was only discipline applied early enough. A man went out upon the high wire, easy, 1,000 crossings already in his legs, and fell. No grace in it, struck the net wrong, came to rest in a heap over which the whole tent held its breath. The lion tamer came out from the wings, not angry, only dutiful. He made a small sign, and 2 attendants lifted the fallen man, neither roughly nor gently, and bore him to the edge of the cage. No one in the crowd rose. The lion turned its head, not toward the man on the ground, but toward the Russian, toward his place in the dark, and its eyes were the very blue and gold of the flags upon the ridge. He woke with it still upon him. The Finn was already standing, looking at the 2 paths where the road divided. One bent west, downhill, toward easier ground and the promise of shelter. One held east, through country that offered nothing but the certainty of direction. "Do not take the western road," the Russian said. His voice was not yet his own, still half in the tent. "Something is wrong with the easy one. I saw it." "You dreamed it." "Yes. It is a dream." The Finn said this as one says a thing one half believes and cannot afford to. He felt the wrongness of the western path himself, felt it in his teeth, and trusted the feeling no more than he trusted anything of that kind. For trusting it was a door his people had nailed shut 3 generations past, in a country to the south, by men with a cross and a list of names. He turned from the dream, as he had been raised to. "We will decide by daylight." They made camp at the fork. That was decision enough. In the night, a single reindeer took the western path of its own accord. It went perhaps half a verst before the slope gave way beneath it. The Finn heard it go. He lay still in the dark and did not rise, and in the morning the herd was 1 short, and the western path stood quiet in that settled, finished silence of ground that has taken something for its own. The Russian regarded him across the dead fire. He did not say, "I told you so." He had no need. "It went so that we should not," the Finn said, testing whether he could make himself believe it. "No," the Russian said, gentle for once. "It went because you did not hear me. The deer only stepped into the gap where the hearing ought to have been." He rose, slowly, his boots already on. "You will hear it in time. Every man of your blood hears it in time. Only the longer one waits, the more it costs." They broke camp before light and took the eastern road. Neither spoke for a long while. The Finn carried the absence of the dead deer as one carries a thing one might have prevented. That is to say, everywhere. After that, the land ceased to pretend it was the land they had left behind. The cold loosened its grip by degrees. Grass showed through the snow where grass had no business showing. The flags came more often, then without pause, strung between low dwellings that sat in the valleys ahead as though they had grown there of themselves. And somewhere in among it all, a hum began. Beneath everything, scarcely a sound at all, more a pressure upon the chest than a thing the ear could hold. And 2 days short of that place, so near that the Finn could feel the roads ending as one feels a held breath about to break, the Russian did not wake. He had gone in the night. No sound had reached the Finn, who slept lightly. He was already cold when the Finn found him. The fire was not. The Finn sat with it a long while. There was no one to tell, and the cold was already saying all that needed saying. He had half expected it, he understood now, as one half expects the thing one has refused to look upon directly. The Russian had been spending something the whole road that did not come back. The reckoning had simply come due 2 days short of the door. He built the fire higher, for the dead man would have wanted the warmth even now, and it was a foolish thought, and he thought it all the same. That night, the Russian returned, not as a spirit, as himself, across a fire that was not there, looking better than he had since the river, the gray gone out of his face. The Finn knew he was dreaming, and knew, in the same breath, that this was the truest thing to have happened to him in many weeks, and felt no contradiction in it. The door his people had nailed shut stood open at last, 2 days from home. The first thing he marked were the Russian's feet, bare, pale and bare upon snow that, in the dream, was not cold. The toes spread as a man spread who stands upon summer grass. "Your boots," the Finn said. The Russian looked down at his own feet, and something crossed his face the Finn had never once seen there before. "Ah," he said, "those." He worked his toes, deliberately, with pleasure. "The first day of my service my feet pained me, the very first day, and every day after for 30 years. By the end of the first week I had reckoned that not one other man complained of it, not one, and resolved that neither would I." He raised his eyes. 30 years, and I never spoke one word of my feet to a living soul. And then he laughed. It rose out of him enormous, helpless, and bright. A laugh with 30 years of swallowed complaint behind it. A laugh like a dam giving way. The Russian, careful, dutiful, measured to the very syllable, bent double with it, gasping, wiping his eyes, and the Finn stood there entirely undone, for in all those weeks he had never once imagined such a sound could live inside the man. "I will not," the Russian managed, "wear these God-forsaken boots in death as well. I shall go barefoot into whatever comes after, and I shall complain of everything in it." The Finn found he was nearly laughing himself, around something that was grief as well. The Russian settled, wiped his face, looked upon the Finn with a tenderness the daylight man would never have permitted himself. "You hear me now," he said. "Imagine that. It wanted my dying to make you listen to what your own people have been telling you the whole road long." This was said without bitterness, nearly with pride. 2 days, that is all that remains. Walk them. I will carry you the rest of the... You will carry nothing of the kind. Leave the body to the land. The land knows what is to be done with the body. It is the one thing it has never forgotten. He was already turning, already growing lighter, already going. I will go on ahead. I will tell them you are coming. Tell whom? But the fire that was not there had gone to nothing, and the Russian with it. And the Finn woke in the dark with his face wet, the herd breathing close about him, and for the first time in his life, a dream he could not reason himself out of. No. He walked the last 2 days alone, and they were the first 2 days he had ever truly walked.
Rano mi rano na polje zlatno slunce izgreva, gora pe zemlja sveti, veter nosi naše pesmi. Izgrej slunce i na gora, zemlja pe veter nosi naše pesmi.
The dreams came to him now, whether he slept or no. He saw Artur Edvard, the grandfather who had written the letter, whose hand had set down the same words twice, in 2 tongues, that neither half of the family should lose them. He saw the road behind him not as snow but as a white thread the whole line had been paying out for 100 years, that someone, someday, might find the way back along it. He understood walking, that the deer his family had once herded, the deer that could not be fenced, at which the careful neighbors with their pigs and their sheep had laughed, that fared better for never being fenced at all, had been the truest thing they carried out of the old country, and the first thing the new country had tried to take from them. The reindeer walked easily now. They knew the ground or wanted it. Nothing led them. On the second evening he began, without deciding to hum, a low note, and above it, riding within it, a second, higher, caught in the same breath. It cracked from him and slipped away, and he lost it, and found it again. It did not come easily. It was the most familiar thing he had ever done. His grandmother had owned the shape of that sound, and had never once been permitted to use it. And here it was, alive in his own throat, hard-won, and exactly like kin. He came over the last ridge, and the valley opened before him, and it did not open as valleys open. Color rose up out of it. Not weather, not the brief arc of bent light that comes and goes upon its season, but a thing that had settled and meant to remain. The 5 colors of the flags lifted from their lines and laid across the whole of the sky, a roof of them, a hall of them, blue, white, red, green, and gold, arching down to a low dwelling where no dwelling had cause to stand, and light moving about it that owed nothing to the sun. A palace roofed in sky. The hum here was enormous and had taken shape. 2 notes in a single throat, the high one riding the low. The very sound he had only just learned returned to him 1,000-fold. The family's voice at the far end of the road, answering the small, cracked likeness of it in his own breast. It was not paradise. He could see that even now, even seeing as he had at last learned to see. Those who came out to him were thin, and there were not many, and the country behind them was as hard as the letter had promised. The land would hold them. It would not keep them from dying. The Russian, 2 days behind, stood proof of that, and the proof did not break the radiance. It dwelt within the radiance, as a true thing dwells within it. But they came out to meet him. His cousins, his far blood, the eastern half of a family the century had cut in 2. And among them, where the color came down to the earth, stood Artur Edvard, who had written the letter with 2 hands. And beside him, barefoot upon the impossible grass, complaining cheerfully to whoever would listen, stood the Russian, home before him, exactly as he had promised, telling them all that the Finn was coming. The reindeer did not wait to be led in. They went toward the unfenced ground as water goes downhill, certain and glad of it, and the Finn followed his herd down into the valley as his family had been trying to walk for 100 years. Behind him the ended world remained ended. The dead radios stayed silent. None of it was mended, and none of it ever would be. Ahead, the hum held its 2 notes and did not let go, and the man with the bad feet and the good laugh waited in the rainbow beside his grandfather, barefoot at last. And the road was white, and it alone led home.
Rano mi rano na polje zlatno slunce izgreva, gora pe zemlja sveti, veter nosi naš te pesni. Izgrej slunce na gora, zemlja pe veter nosi naš te pesni.
Once upon a tall tale. The Demon's Finger. Season 0, Episode 9. By Morgan Olson.
Now, I'm going to give you the moral before I give you the story, which ain't the usual order of things. But this particular story don't leave a man much room at the end for morals. So here it is, free of charge. If you ever get into an elevator and there's something laying there on the floor, don't pick up the demon's finger. I know. You're saying, well, how am I supposed to know it's a demon's finger? And that, friends, is exactly the problem. You won't. Daniel didn't. And by the time he did know, he was 50 floors closer to hell than any sensible man ought to be. Part 1. The Man of the Second Birth. The year is 1915, and Daniel has just left his job with the lawman of the Cincinnati Stagecoach Company. Been at the Cleveland branch near a decade. Wasn't anything personal. Just that everybody was driving these electric stagecoaches now. Automobiles, if you want to use their government name. And an electric stagecoach don't need a shotgun man. It needs a mechanic. Daniel could shoot the buttons off a vest at 40 paces, but he couldn't tell you what a battery wanted from him. Nobody asked Daniel about any of it. He didn't have no choice about the matter. You'll want to remember that phrase. It comes back. Now, you might not have heard about people like Daniel. He is a man of the second birth. Originally, the churches called it the second birth and the second death, but folks dropped the back half of that name pretty quick. People rightly enjoy skipping the explanation of the death part. Here's the death part anyway. Daniel had been one of the lawmen killed at the OK Corral. Yes, that one. Now, the books will tell you no lawman died at the OK Corral. The books were paid to say it. October of 1881. 30 seconds of gunfire, those same books have been stretching longer ever since, and Daniel caught 2 of those seconds square in the chest. He woke up just after his own funeral. Not at all what he was expecting. And he missed the whole thing. This was back when folks were just learning about second birth people. When nobody knew what to do with a man who came walking up the road 3 days after they'd sung him into the ground. Some places shot them again, just to be sure. Some places built churches around them. Most places just asked them, real quiet, to move along. Daniel moved along. Didn't choose to die. Didn't choose to come back. Didn't get consulted either time. He'd known nothing but lawman work in his first life, so that's what he did with the second one. Now, the second birth came with a gift. And nobody chose that either. They could smell death. Literally, smell it. Their own, or anybody's. Coming down the road the way you or I might smell rain. Daniel found out about his on a train out of Abilene. Must have been 88 or 89. He was dozing against the window when a smell came over him that he'd know the rest of his days. Rain on cold iron, and fresh turned earth, and under it something sweetish going wrong, like flowers left too long in the water. Grave smell. He was up and moving before his eyes were rightly open. Got off at a water stop, couldn't have told you why, and stood on that platform and watched the train pull away toward a bridge that wasn't going to hold. That was the whole trick of Daniel's second life, once he understood it. He never fought death. He just declined the invitation. 30-some years, never once in a scrap that truly scared him, because his nose always got him out the door before the scrap arrived. You'd be forgiven for thinking that made him the safest man in America. You'd be forgiven, but you'd be wrong. Part 2. 50 Floors Closer to Heaven. With the stagecoach work dried up, Daniel got a letter. A company in New York City. Second birth folks, run by them. Staffed by them, top to bottom. Had heard of him. Good resume, they said. Come take a meeting, they said. 50th floor, they said. Daniel had never been that high in either life, but he'd heard buildings in New York get that high now. They'd just finished one that scraped 57 floors, tallest thing human hands ever stacked. So he put on his good coat and rode east. The building was the kind of place that makes a man hold his hat for no reason. Marble like a courthouse, brass like a casket, and an express elevator with an operator in a red uniform and white gloves. A narrow fellow who chewed cloves, you could smell them off him 3 steps away, and whose whole job was riding that box up and down like a ferryman who'd lost his river. Except when Daniel walked up, the operator was stepping out. "Smoke break," the man said. Said it the way a fellow says a thing he's said at the same hour every day for years. Worn smooth as a saddle horn, regular as a toll. He held the gate, told Daniel the lever wasn't complicated, and was gone. A man alone in a small brass room with a lever he's never touched is going to touch the lever. Daniel got her moving, and she moved rough under his unfamiliar hand, bucking a little between floors. And somewhere around the 30th floor, the jostling shook something loose from wherever it had been resting. It rolled across the elevator floor and bumped his boot. A little thing, wrapped up neat in white paper, twisted at the end. Now be fair to Daniel, because the story isn't, and somebody ought to be. You show a man born in the 1850s, a small item wrapped in white paper. There is exactly one thing in his entire catalog of earthly experience that comes wrapped that way, and it's a cigar. That's the whole list. So Daniel picked it up and put it in his breast pocket. Figured a man careless enough to drop a cigar could spare it. Nobody made him do it. Mark that down. Everything else in this story happened to Daniel. This one thing, this one little thing, he chose. And his nose told him nothing. Which, you'll see, was fair. His nose was in perfect working order. There just wasn't a death in that elevator to smell. Not yet. Part 3. The Meeting. The 50th floor was all glass and steel, and men in collars stiff enough to stop a bullet. Every one of them second birth. Every one of them looking at Daniel like the tent revival had wandered into the country club. They said his resume was strong. They said he'd done things, real things, and they respected that. And then a silver-haired one at the end of the table folded his hands and got to the matter. "You have to understand, Mr. Daniel," he said. "Every man in this room has been to the other side, same as you. The difference is, we came back with data." A little pause, the kind you could shave with. "You came back with a hymnal." See, these were men of science, or so they told themselves. The way they figured it, they'd died and come back, and no angel had signed for the delivery. Question settled, answered by experiment. And here was Daniel, still saying grace, still carrying the faith he'd been buried in. And you have to understand what that looked like from a 50th floor window. Out west, the second birth folks had gone and gotten colorful. Pop-up Pentecostal tents where the preacher had died twice and wasn't shy about it. There was even a moving picture. One of those little tramp fellows made it, called Death of a Gunman, on account of that's what kept happening out west, over and over, for whatever reason. Everybody saw it. Nobody liked it, but everybody saw it. So when New York Money looked at Daniel, they didn't see a lawman. They saw the tents. They saw the moving picture. They saw an outsider religion knocking on the door with a resume in its hand. But here's the part that'll surprise you. They made the offer anyway. Good wage, too. Just the one condition, and the silver-haired man laid it out gentle, like he was doing Daniel a kindness. The hymnal stays home. The grace stays unsaid. In this building, a man believes in the data, or he believes quietly enough that the data can't hear him. And Daniel, who had not chosen his death, or his birth, or his gift, or the automobile. Daniel stood up and put on his hat and made the second choice of his day. "No, sir, I don't believe I will." 2 choices in one day, after 35 years of none. He was running up quite a bill. They thanked him for coming. They wished him well. And down he rode, 50 floors, with everything he'd chosen in 2 whole lives riding along with him. His God in his chest, and a stranger's cigar in his pocket over top of it. Now I'll tell you the one question nobody on that 50th floor ever thought to ask, for all their data. In a city where every inch of ground has an owner, and every owner has a landlord, nobody in that building ever asked who held the deed on floors 1 through 57. You keep that question in your pocket, friend. It rides along nice. Part 4. The Man in the Red Uniform. The operator was back at his post for the ride down, and the man looked wrong, pale as fresh plaster. White gloves not steady on the lever, chewing those cloves like they owed him money. Eyes going everywhere except at Daniel. And then worse, only at Daniel. Daniel, freshly turned down, and turning down, and in a mood to needle somebody, offered him a joke on the way past. "Lose your cigar, friend?" Hell of a thing to misplace. Now, take a moment and hear that sentence from the other side of the elevator. That operator knew exactly what was wrapped in that white paper, and knew exactly where it had been resting, and had spent his smoke break discovering it gone. And here comes a stranger out of the West, calm as Sunday, who looks him dead in the eye and says, "Lose your cigar, friend." That man didn't hear a joke. He heard a confession. He thought he was standing lever to shoulder with a fellow who steals from demons for sport, and does comedy about it after. He didn't say one word the whole way down. 50 floors of silence. Daniel figured that was New York for you. Not his worry, he told himself. It was entirely his worry. It was in his breast pocket. Part 5. The Flophouse. Daniel took a bed at a flophouse down near the docks because it was what he could afford, and because, he'd never have said this out loud, it was the closest thing in that whole vertical city to a saloon. Low ceiling, bad light, a bar in the front room where nobody asked your business. Felt near normal. He got himself a drink, and after the day he'd had, he figured he'd earned that cigar too. He took it from his breast pocket and worked the white paper loose. Struck a match with the other hand, already lifting the thing toward his mouth. And the paper came open, and what was under it was not tobacco leaf. It was gray, and it was jointed, and it had a nail on it, black as a beetle's back. And Daniel had exactly one heartbeat to understand what he'd been carrying against his chest all day. That's when the smell of death walked into the bar. Not a whiff, not a warning 3 counties out, polite with time to spare. This was rain on cold iron and turned earth and flowers gone wrong in the water, loud as a fire bell. And for the first time in 35 years, the grave smell had his own name on it. Understand what that meant to a man like Daniel. His gift was avoidance. A whole second life built on stepping off the train early. And here was the invitation, hand-delivered, with no platform left to step off onto. The door opened. 4 men came in, city suits, hats down low. And between the 4 of them, they had one eye. A single red eye, sitting in the socket of the first man through the door. And as Daniel watched, that man plucked it out casual as checking a pocket watch and handed it back to the second, who seated it in his own empty socket and took up the looking. The one holding the eye said, "We know you've got our boss's finger." And here's the thing you should know, that Daniel worked out in the space of that sentence. That eye had been on him all day. A demon can always see what's his, even after it's been cut off of him. And hear that carefully, because it's the finger the boss sees, not the eye. Every floor of that elevator, every minute of that meeting, every step to the docks, watched. They hadn't come when he took it. They came when he struck the match. Fire's the one thing you can do to a relic that can't be undone, and the boss's patience died with that match. Daniel didn't know any of that yet. He just knew the room smelled like his own grave, and 4 men were between him and the door. Part 6. The Gunfight. Now here's where I have to disappoint you because you're expecting me to describe the gunfight, and I can't. I wasn't fast enough. Nobody was fast enough. The second birth makes a man quicker than he's got any right to be. But so does working for a demon, and what happened in that barroom happened in the space between 2 beats of a slow heart. I can tell you what the drink did. Daniel's hand left his glass on the bar, and the glass was still rocking when it started, and the glass was still rocking when it ended. I can tell you it cost him. The first shot out of those city suits took the hat off his head, and the second took a little skin with it, a hot line above the ear, and Daniel understood in that instant that his legend was 30 years out of practice, and these men were not. And I can tell you the one thing he clocked mid-draw that saved his life, because it's the kind of thing only a lawman notices while dying is going on all around him. 4 gunmen. 1 eye. They had to pass it. And a man is stone blind in the little moment the eye leaves his hand. And the eye itself, in that little moment, is just a small red thing traveling through the air. Daniel had shot the buttons off a vest at 40 paces. The eye was closer than that. Part 7. The New Smell. 4 men on the floor, the red eye somewhere among them, shot through and gone dark, no more troublesome now than a marble. A thin line of blood above Daniel's ear, and his good hat ruined on the boards. And the grave smell lifted off him like a fever breaking. Rain and iron and turned earth. Gone. His nose went quiet. The invitation declined again. Same as Abilene. He was halfway to believing it was over when he caught the other smell. Underneath. It had been there all day, he realized. Faint as a thing can be and still be, hiding under the horse and the coal smoke and the city. And only now, in the after quiet, could he pick it out. Sulfur. Not coming from the bodies. He checked. Not from the dead red eye. Coming from his breast pocket. He set the finger on the bar, white paper and all, gentle as you'd set down a sleeping snake. And he walked for the door. And when his hand touched the handle, he felt the little weight against his chest again. He didn't look down. He'd been a lawman long enough to know evidence when it followed him. And a few things came clear to Daniel then, standing in that doorway. Why a man who worked in that brass box chewed cloves all day long. Why that man's smoke break came regular as a toll. And why his own nose, which had never failed him, had said nothing in that elevator. It hadn't failed. It had simply never been taught this. His gift knew every kind of death there was. He'd learned death on a train out of Abilene 30 years back, and death had smelled the same every day since. Death is an old smell. Damnation is a new one. Last anybody saw of Daniel, he was walking out of that flop house with one hand flat over his breast pocket and his nose lifted to the night wind. A man trying to learn a smell no living soul had ever survived long enough to name. And somewhere above that city, in a building full of men who don't believe in anything they can't measure, and who pay their tithe monthly all the same, they just call it rent. Something that can always see what's his watched him go. Where he walked to, I couldn't tell you. That's not the story I was telling. Everything in this story happened to Daniel. The dying, the returning, the gift, the automobile, even his religion, a faith he never had assigned to him by strangers in a room he'd traveled 1,000 miles to sit in. In 2 whole lives, that man got to choose exactly once. And that one's still collecting. And the ride's a little rough, and something small comes rolling across that floor, wrapped up neat in white paper. You leave it lay. Hi, I'm Morgan Olson, the author. I had a funny idea that I decided to put a little extra story here at the end because of a mistake. Here is an Easter egg of something you will never find anywhere else in this universe. Amy's writes, Once Upon a Tall Tale, Season 0, Episode 4. The men in Cleveland fought for the moon every blood moon, and Amy Kovach watched every one of those fights from the top of a coal hopper with her knees pulled up to her chin. She was a yard kid, born in the shadow of the roundhouse, small enough that her brothers used to lose track of her in a room. Her father fought for the moon. Her 3 brothers fought for the moon. Every year they came home from the yards with their shirts torn, and their eyes swelled shut, and their knuckles split down to the honest bone. And every year, when Amy asked who won, they said the same thing. Nobody remembered. That was the trouble with the claim. It got defended annually and settled never. And a claim like that survives on stubbornness alone, and stubbornness was getting old. The old man they called Whisper had noticed this before anyone. He'd been a chanter in the great fights, one of the men who hammered the verses flat as iron and rolled them out of busted lungs, until the coal dust and the shouting took his voice down to a sound like a rasp on soft pine. He couldn't fight anymore, and he couldn't sing anymore, so he did the one thing the rest of the yards never had time for. He watched, and what he saw was this. In 40 years of fights, the moon had never once looked at a fist. She looked at the singing, every time. When the chants rose, she leaned close over the smokestacks, and when the chants broke down into chains and bottles, she drifted up high and pale and patient, the way a woman steps back from a table when the card game turns ugly. The fighting was just what men did while the chant was doing the real work. Nobody had ever noticed because noticing takes stillness, and the yards had none to spare. So he trained the girl. He started her on the spine of it, the verse every fight in 40 years had opened on. No surrender, no apology. The moon has always belonged to Cleveland, and made her hammer it flat the old way before he'd give her another word. He had her haul coal sacks up the hopper ladders until her ribs opened like bellows. He stood her at the edge of the main line and made her chant against a freight at full steam. Again, louder. The train doesn't care about your feelings, and neither does the moon. Until the night, a fireman 2 miles down at Collinwood swore a girl's voice had come through his cab window over the wheels. He made her learn every verse from every side of the river, the east side verses and the flats verses, and the ones the Hungarians kept in the old meter. Because a claim belongs to the whole city, or it belongs to nobody, and a chanter who only knows her own street is just a fighter who hasn't swung yet. Folks around the yards knew the old man was training the Kovach girl, and they held it the way the yards held most things, sideways, without looking at it straight. A busted chanter and a girl too small to fight. The pair of them together not worth a comment at the lunch counter. Then came March of 1952 and the ball. The papers would call it a dance. The men who organized it called it a coronation, and never said of what, and nobody thought to press them. The arena on Euclid Avenue, one night only, every crew in the city under one roof, which had never happened, because the whole point of the claim was that it got contested outdoors, under the moon herself, where she could watch. Moving it indoors was either genius or sacrilege, and the yards argued that point right up until the doors opened. Pittsburgh had been waiting for exactly this. They came in quiet, maybe 30 of them, steel men with their collars up, and they didn't come to dance. They came for the claim itself, which is to say, her attention. And any railroad man can tell you the difference between a town the moon watches and a town she's quit. And their thinking was sound. You had to give them that. Outdoors, under her eye, no beating had ever stuck. Whatever got lost, one blood moon got quietly unlost by the next, which is the real reason 40 years of fights had settled nothing. But indoors, on a stage, in public, on the record, every crew in the city watching, and no moon overhead to stitch the belief back together. Break the chant in a room like that, and it stays broken. They had a chanter of their own, a big man with a voice like a Bessemer pour, and when the first Cleveland verse went up, he answered it. The arena had twice the people it was built for, and every one of them heard the challenge land. The east side crews pushed toward the stage. The flats crews pushed from the other side. The whole room began to grind like a coupling under strain. And anyone who'd stood in the yards on a blood moon knew exactly what came next, and knew it would happen indoors this time, with 10,000 people and 2 doors. Amy Kovach was not on the bill. She had spent her whole life asking who won and being told nobody remembered, and she did not mean to ask ever again. She got up anyway. Nobody who was there could tell you afterward how a girl that size got to the stage through a crowd that thick. What they could tell you was what came out of her when she opened her mouth. It was the chant, the old flat-hammered iron chant, every verse from every side of the river, stitched into one. But she'd learned it against freight trains, and it came out at train speed, with the yard rhythm driving under it like wheels on a joint in the rail. And there is a word we use now for what that sounds like. And in March of 1952, the word did not exist yet. The room came apart. Not into fighting, past fighting, out the other side of it, into something the fire marshal had no box for on his form. So he wrote riot and shut the hall down mid-song. The Pittsburgh chanter never got his second verse. Men who'd cracked each other's heads for 30 years stood shoulder to shoulder, howling no surrender. No apology back at a girl. Her father and her 3 brothers in the thick of it, knuckles whole for once. And at the back of the hall, an old man stood moving his mouth with no sound coming out. And for once, that made no difference at all, because 10,000 people were doing it for him. Pittsburgh had planned for a room the moon couldn't see into. Nobody had told them about Collinwood. A voice trained to come through a cab window over the wheels at full steam does not stop at a tar roof and steel trusses. And above the arena, the moon rose the deep furnace red she only showed for the fights. And she held that red, they say, until Amy was done. which is how you know she heard it through the roof, and how you know what she thought of it. That was the last fight. There's never been another, because there can't be. Amy retired the fists that night, and nobody has been able to unretire them since. The claim renews by sound now. That's the whole of what the yards mean when they say Amy's rights. Not rights over anybody, but the ruling she handed down from that stage. The moon belongs to Cleveland, and Cleveland pays for her in noise. As for the coronation, the men who named the night never said what was getting crowned, and now you know why. It wasn't theirs to say. It wasn't a king, and it surely wasn't their big man from Pittsburgh. Cleveland crowned the moon that night, out loud, indoors, in front of every witness the city had, and Amy Kovac performed the ceremony. It's why the city had to become what it became, why the music never left, why the hall went up on the lakefront and not in New York or Memphis, whatever those cities tell you. And it's why, every blood moon, there are kids down at the flats on bicycles making an ungodly racket at the sky. The moon's dogs, folks call them. And no cop in Cleveland will move them along. That isn't vandalism. That's jurisprudence. No surrender, no apology. The moon has always belonged to Cleveland, but since 1952, she's belonged to it in writing, if you take my meaning. And Amy Kovac is the one who signed.